Welcome to People Talking Sitting Down.
A podcast, and I think it's an art form. It's an expression of yourself.
Yes.
You said to me up there, you're like, I always want to be the kid in my parents' basement.
I'm going to be a dude in a t-shirt and a backwards hat in his mom's basement launching a podcast, and we're going to figure out how to make this. What can I do? What can I do? I'm like, oh, that means I need a domain. Oh my God, I got to buy a domain. Trying to fire $10? No, it's $1,000. Fuck it, let's buy it.
You bought it?
I bought it. If you can launch a podcast out of your parents' house with only in-person guests and a backwards hat and a t-shirt with a name like Trend to Fire, I guess anything can happen, right?
Yeah.
Fuck it, let's do it.
Julian Dorey, welcome.
Thanks for having me, man. Great to be here.
Thank you for coming. I know we were already kind of hanging out earlier, but this is the first episode that I haven't sent somebody a prep sheet. Usually I send.
Oh, you send prep sheets.
I send 20 topics, let everybody know, or let them know what I want to talk about, and this is the first time we're gonna do it your style. Put the headphones
Do it
on.
live. I like that. That's good. Thanks for doing that.
But for a little bit of background for those that don't know, the Julian Dorey Podcast, where did it start? It's quickly become one of my favorite podcasts. So it's been
Thank you.
nice to get to know you. But I would love to just hear the backstory of it.
Well, I worked on Wall Street for like 4 or 5 years. That's what I thought I was supposed to do. Just go get, not necessarily Wall Street, but go get that stable job out of college, work your way up, doop, doop, doop. And I started to realize pretty quickly, even if I didn't admit it to myself early on, that like this was, picture me in a bank. Like, come on, in a suit every day. Jesus Christ, slick back hair, the whole bit.
I laugh when on Instagram, you still got that kind of a picture.
Back in the day. Oh,
Yeah.
it's so funny. Yeah. There's like one, I think there's one left over from them, but that was like the thing to do. So I started to realize subconsciously early on, this was not going to be for me. And, you come out of college and you learn how the world works a little bit. That's one thing, and I wouldn't complain about this with college. College can't teach you that, right? For all the complaints people have about college these days, and many of them are well-placed, that's not on them to do. You kind of have to go out there and learn what it is. So, it in a good way, like the world kind of kicks your ass right into place. Like, no, this is how things go. This is your opportunities you can kind of get to. And as I started to get a little more conscious of that, over the years working on Wall Street, I realized that like I did not want to do this. And
Did you like it though?
I loved the people I work with.
Yeah.
Like to this day, like my boss Larry is like my boy.
'Cause it
Like,
doesn't
love
sound
that guy.
like it was a bad experience.
No, it was actually I'm very grateful for it. I overstayed the length that I should have, because like I knew there was a good year and a half I should have left and made the move earlier, but I was too much of a bitch to make the move. But I love the people I work with, and the part of my job that involved me going out into New York City, the greatest city in the world, where fucking everyone is, and meeting people, having to know who talked to who, why this industry worked with that industry, how that industry worked, how this industry worked, why this girl talked with that guy, whatever. That was half my job. I loved that part of the job. I just didn't like the actual job we did. I was good at it, but like,
And what does that consist of?
you look at, we were the quarterback for everyone's financial lives. Like we handled ultra high net worth people. The average net worth of someone on our book was $80 million. We work with people that were as high as billionaires, and we work with public companies on things like 10b5-1 plans, or even something extremely simple like a 401k, which literally anyone could run that. But if you got into something like that, you had an excuse to talk with the big people who then might want to become clients. So we would do things like that. But I was good at it. I don't think I was Michael Jordan or anything, but that's just because I worked hard. It wasn't because I liked the work, And so once I started to realize, like I always had these side LLCs with friends and my world was getting opened up, and I'd always kind of been like in denial about being a creative and being someone like that. And it was so clear, like, I was like, what are you, a fucking idiot? This is exactly what you are. Like you have that's where your mind goes. You always want to draw the picture and make the visual of the stuff. You live off music and what it does to your veins, like all these little things and things I started to realize, you know, I would bring them up to people because I could hear them or see them and they'd look at me like I had 10 heads, especially people I worked with. And I was like, oh, they have better genes for me for like this, and I have better genes for that. Never thought about that stuff. So I was working on, like, in the business I was in, the way it worked was you come out of college, if you get that type of opportunity on a team like I did, you work like a dog, grind for 4 or 5 years, you make no money.
And it's like I have a couple of friends that have gone that route, and it's sun up to sundown. Like you're in the office.
See, when people say Wall Street, that can mean a lot of things.
Yeah.
I wouldn't describe our work like that. Were there times like that? Yes, but there was a lot of, you had to go be social, right? Which, you know, is another form of sun up, sun down. And it's not just like, oh, going to the fucking club and ripping it up. No, you're like out there schmoozing, talking business, trying to, you know, it's work.
Yeah.
Some of it is fun. I have fun with some of those parts, but it's a little different. But I worked very, very hard, and I love the people I worked with, and it was the highest stakes in that end of the business. So in that, though, it's like the thing, you come out of college, you don't make money. I lived paycheck to paycheck my entire.
You're in New York City, so
I lived in North Jersey. We did a lot of work in New York City. We did work all over. We had an office in Florida for our team as well. Like, you know, so I didn't spend a lot of time down. My time was spent up here, to be very clear with that. My boss was killing it in Florida. But, you know, it's like you do that grind 4 or 5 years, and then if you do a good job and you make it, you get the offer. And now you're brought into the inner sanctum, and now you make real money.
Yeah. And what is that? Because I've heard you say that when you get the offer.
Yeah.
Is there is it years? Is it the amount of time?
No, it's like you get the offer for the money.
Yeah.
Like, here's what you're going to make a year. Here's what percentage of the business you may be entitled to.
Is that one of the fields where there's like steps where it's like, you know, after 3 years you can be a VP or an associate?
No.
And then
Actually, there were weird titles. I didn't give a fuck about that. No one even understood how that worked. Yeah. That doesn't matter. You're basically your own business within the bank. Okay. When you're in ultra high net worth or in wealth management, whatever the hell you want to call it, whatever level you're at with it, no matter what it is, no matter your clients are average of $1 million or 80 million, where we were, you basically run your business. Mm-hmm. The bank has full autonomy over you, though, and tells you, you know, here's toilet paper and you're allowed to use this to wipe your ass after your shit, right? But it's your business. So it really just consists of, once you're brought into the inner sanctum with a guy like Larry, like my boss, who, you know, to his credit, gave me like an unbelievable offer, what I would describe as an absolute life-changing offer, which was also, that's like the ultimate sign of trust. He built that business himself for 30, at that point, it was like 30 years or something, right? So he's like, Julian, you've done a good job. Here's an offer for a lot of money, like a lot of money. And now you're going to get X percentage of business that we bring in. You're going to be my guy with me.
Yeah,
and
you're good to go.
Whatever I touch, you touch, which is like, the thing was, I knew it wasn't a decision. I knew by the time he gave me that decision in the end of summer 2019, I knew the answer was going to have to be no. And it broke my heart because I loved him and I knew it was going to kill him. But he also kind of knew.
And did it kill you in a way?
It killed me for him. It didn't kill me for me.
Because you knew.
Because I was like, fuck this. I don't enjoy this. Yeah. Right? But he was so supportive, and he's like, hey, you know what? Because when you're still like the associate down at the bottom, the company handles your checks, right? So he was like, you're doing great work. Obviously, you're financially responsible for yourself. So why don't you hang here while you're looking for your new job, you know? For a few months.
So at that point, you weren't like, all right, I'm going to go start a podcast.
No.
Okay.
No.
So the next step was, I'm going to go get into what I love to do.
Well, I wanted to get over to like the marketing side. I wanted to get into the creative side. And so I worked very hard. It's about a 5-6 month process. Went into it expecting to get my ass kicked. Did get my ass kicked. Trying very, very, I mean, you know about this, trying hard to not just get a job, but make a complete industry shift.
Yeah.
And I went into it with no expectations. I was applying as someone who was coming from banking, turning down a lot of money. I was applying for jobs in New York City, paying 35 grand a year to prove myself. Yeah. Which, you know, if
you could wash dishes.
if you're out there familiar with New York City, 35 grand will about get you halfway to hell. Right. So I was finally kind of breaking through when the pandemic hit and everything washed up in a second.
Yeah. So we're like January, February.
Well, March, it hit. The first day of quarantine was March 13th, 2020. And it was bad, like because I was up there. Like it was very, very bad when it hit.
Yeah, that's right. Because it was different in New York.
Oh my
and
God.
even being close here in Philly. It's
yeah, like I had a client who was I still adhere to like the confidentiality thing. So I had a client who was a high level decision maker at a prominent hospital, let's say in Philly. That's accurate. And the way it worked, they basically had an extra 10 to 14 days than New York and North Jersey did.
Yeah.
So they were able to weather it a lot better here. But when that shit first hit New York, bro, cyclone. And like, obviously that turned into all kinds of shit and it dragged out way too long. And we're going to relitigate a lot of things that happened during that time period. But I will tell you, the guy who worked to my left, healthy as could be, and I could say this because it was a public story, but, you know, 44, 45 years old, captain of his softball team, no pre-existing conditions, 60 days in a coma on a respirator. He was a miracle. He lived. There's stories about it, right? The dude I knew who was the healthiest motherfucker I've ever met in my life, 2% body fat, veins coming out of his arms, hot yoga 3 times a week, 6 days a week lifting, built like a brick shit house, he didn't die or anything, but like, borderline like dead, sending me hallucinated messages, like because it was just so concentrated at the time. So like it hit way harder, and you know when a virus comes on, it's most dangerous right at the beginning, and this was literally like ground zero of what was happening there. So
and to be that close to it too.
Oh yeah, it was crazy, dude. It was like a war zone.
That's what it like when I think back about COVID, like the news, like you see the ambulances pulling up.
It was nuts.
The refrigerator trucks in New York.
Oh yeah.
And it was just like, this is happening. And
this So, you know, that ahead of that though, I had been doing some media work with some of my LLCs over the past year. And I had some buddies who had encouraged me to do shit on camera because I never wanted to do that. I always wanted to be the backroom guy. And yet kind of my talent was communication. So my buddies Mitch and Mike Laxamana, my buddy Chaz Servino, and then even from childhood, my friend Andrew Barksdale.
We'll get to him later.
Sometimes I mix up their names now. It's kind of funny. But my buddy Andrew Barksdale had been bothering me for years to do like content and stuff. And I never wanted to do it. But we started doing like working some conferences and doing interviews on cameras at things. And I liked it. And in the year leading up to the pandemic. So my buddy Ty asked me to do some quick media work for him end of January 2020. And I'm like, sure, I'll come do it. And so we went and did this thing where, long story short, at the very end of this session, he runs a lacrosse company. So he had like this giant camp.
Are you allowed to say which one it is?
Yeah, Athletes United.
Okay.
In South Jersey. So he had this giant camp, and at the end we had all the lights on like this, and he said, hey, I want you to interview me and let's go through my story. That was part of what I was doing there. And his story is really cool. He's really magnanimous about the ups and downs of it and some mistakes he made along the way. And he's like a mentor for kids. So he said, hey, you know the actual story. We're not sugarcoating this. I want you to actually like go at me about this stuff. I was like, okay. So I did that. You know, we're friends, but we get in front of the cameras. They darken the whole like facility that we were at. And I'm not thinking anything. We go on camera. It couldn't have been more than 30 minutes, something like that. And at the end we wrap and then all the lights go on and there's 25 to 35 people sitting there. Like, and most of them had been like counselors who work for his company and stuff like that. And they're all like clapping, like mesmerized or whatever. I'm like, what the fuck? So a bunch of them were coming up to me and they're like, bro, do you have a podcast? I'm like, no, what? No.
Had anybody else ever said that to you?
Yes. And I always went, what the fuck am I going to do with a podcast? Yeah. Okay. But it was enough of them who came up to me. It was a bunch of them, like one by one.
Yeah.
And that was a weird day. That was January 26, 2020, and Kobe had died.
That's right.
That afternoon.
That's right.
And so it was a very weird day. right? And I was at this crossroads in my life. So I was driving back up to North Jersey afterwards, probably had an hour and a half drive, something like that. And I drove back in silence and I was getting my ass kicked on the job trail, this, and that. And I'm like, fuck it. If I went to do a podcast, I'd have to do it right. I didn't have any money, but I'm like, I have to get the right equipment. You got to at least have good quality. And so it was the stupidest thing ever. But in my head, while my life is in shambles and I'm trying to get a job and I'm focused on that like full time and I'm still working at my job and doing, good work for my clients because that shit doesn't turn off. I had this like Saturday afternoon hobby where I'd go to like B&H and learn about everything and then slowly start to, figure it out. And so somewhere in the beginning of March, maybe it was March 3rd, 4th, something like that, I hit the enter button on the order for all this shit with money I really don't have. And if you remember, like the last week or so leading up to that pandemic was fucking nuts.
I remember it specifically being like the last hoorah for everybody, which I was in turn. I was freaking out at this point, but it was like St. Patrick's Day.
Oh,
and it was
took the words out of my mouth.
It was kind of like you got the signal, like, oh, world's shutting down on Monday.
Yeah.
And everyone went out for the last hurrah.
We were already shut down up there. I remember all my boys in Philly, they had the last hurrah on St. Patrick's Day. And we were like, what an idiot. Like, looking at what the fuck is wrong with them? But, so I ordered this stuff and that last week was crazy, but also it was nuts in the market. I'm still working in the market. My clients are calling, freaking out. Now everyone ended up being fine. My boss is really good at what he does.
Putting out fires left and right, and starting the initial steps of a podcast.
Yeah, well, I wasn't. I just was an asshole who ordered equipment, no plan. I was still looking for other jobs. There was no thought like I'm gonna do the podcast. It was like, if I did something on the side, this will be what it is. So I order it. I forget about it. Then the whole world stops. Friday, March 13th, first day of quarantine, right? We're sitting in there. Literally, everything's coming to a standstill. New York looks like a fucking war zone. And I get the notification, your equipment has arrived from Amazon downstairs. And I'm like, oh, fuck. And I go down, I pick it up, I bring it upstairs, I sit it on the couch just like this. And I like step back and I look at it. And I'm like, Julian, you have done a lot of dumb shit in your life, like a lot. This is the dumbest shit you have ever done. Wow.
What am I going to do
And
now?
then I look at it, and I don't know how long it was. I don't know if it was 5 seconds or 30 seconds or a minute, but I was like, well, every opportunity I have that I finally worked to go get and on a new job just dried up. The world is stopping, and this equipment showed up on Friday the 13th, the first day of quarantine.
It's a good omen.
If not now, when the fuck would I ever go for it with something like this? And like instantly, it was like, fuck it, let's do it. No plan, no nothing. So we got our clients in shape. Like they were set up pretty well. We got them in shape quick. We got them making money pretty quick too. Inside of like 2 weeks, things were right, which was crazy to think about. And that made life easy because my boss suddenly went from, DEFCON 5 to like, okay,
we're chilling.
All right. Like let's monitor this every day. Like let's work the phones, make sure everyone's good. We'll meet with everyone, do what we got to do. But like, I think we're in business here, which made the work light out of nowhere.
So you had some time.
So work perfect. And he called, I was going to be leaving, right? Like I had set a date to leave. And he called me, calls me towards the end of March. And he goes, well, 2 calls happened. It was like right at the beginning, mid-March. He calls me, he goes, hey, I take it all your jobs just dried up. And I said, yeah. And he goes, all right. We're not able to go to the office, but at some point they're going to let us back in. So how about until we have to go back to the office, you just stay here. You're going to work an hour or 2 a day, get shit done. Unless shit's hitting the fan, I'm really going to need you when that happens.
And you're working from home still.
Yeah, which didn't end up happening, by the way. He's like, you do great work. Just chill, put some money aside. I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking, well, I got my rent. I'm not putting shit aside. Then my dad calls up. And my dad just had like an omen about this because I was going to like not re-sign my lease or whatever. But now I'm thinking, well, I'll re-sign the lease, whatever. He calls me up and he goes, hey, they were saying 2 weeks to stop the curve at this point. And he goes,
throwback.
He's like, they're saying all this 2 week shit. This ain't going to be 2 weeks. I'm like, what do you mean? And we're going to be back in the office in April. He's like, bro, this is going to be a year. These people like this. This is the kind of shit where it's like, once people go inside with fear, they're going to stay there. People are adapting. Do not re-sign your lease. It's a waste of money. Just fucking come down home to South Jersey. All right.
It's a good call.
So I don't re-sign my lease. April, I come back down to South Jersey and I have all this equipment. No hope on a job. Life's in shambles in a way. And my dad's looking at the equipment. He's like, what the fuck is that? And I'm like, it's podcast equipment. He's like, oh my God. And then there was the back room there in their house that was at the time like unused. And he's like, well, if not now, when?
Yeah.
So I went, I built the studio, and for 6 months I built in silence. I didn't tell anyone about it. My family who lived there, like my parents and my aunt was living with them at the time, they knew about it. About 2 months before I ended up launching publicly in September, my buddy Josh came and stayed with us for 3 days. He lived up in the Bronx, so he knew about it. My buddy Ty and his guy Ryan, who were the audio gods, who I had a lot of questions for, they knew I was doing this. And I showed my buddy Nico and my cousin Sydney, who was over a bunch when they were there. But even other people who were like at the house didn't show them. So no one knew.
This is where I want to dive in. Is like, because I've been addicted to podcasts, and that's obviously why I started doing this. What was that process like? Like, I remember when I decided that I was going to do this, I was in like a state of mania. Like, it was every second of every day. I was so
obsession.
Yeah, I was so excited. I was going to solve the world's problems. And I was like, I knew exactly how I was going to do it. And it was all day, every day was just planning. And I started, I mean, it's come together kind of how I wanted it to, but like, how did you start that planning process? What were you going to do? Was it like, all right, I'm just going to start a podcast. I'm going to start a podcast about this topic. I'm just going to speak into a mic. Like,
I knew that I wanted to do guest content and talk with people. I don't like talking to myself. I don't enjoy solo pods. But what I thought was going to happen was, I'm like, fuck, I'm never going to do Zoom. That was a rule from day one. There will be no remote.
And why was that? Why?
Because it's fucking terrible.
I mean, I feel the same way. Yeah.
That's why. I mean, it's awful. And you can't relate. I'm sorry. You can't. This right here, you can't get this on Zoom. You can't. You just can't. People would have to do this job, I think, to really understand what I mean. But once you've done it or you've been on the other side of it, you understand. I've never had a person come to my studio who afterwards did not understand why that's the case. And so I said, okay, I'm never going to get great people to come in here. I'm not going to go for them, right? We're going to build. But I said, even at the beginning, I didn't even think like friends or someone would like come out of their way to be here. Cause like, who the fuck wants to come on a podcast with no one? So I thought I was going to have to do like 30 episodes of solos that involved me talking to my cameras about something and adding some sort of value for an hour and filling the air. So
and that's tough. Cause you're first.
Oh my God.
When I did it, so my brother was the one who sent me with Lightspeed CEO Dax. And then I went down the rabbit hole because I was like, all right, like this.
Oh, you didn't watch the initial ones, did you?
I did. I watched the and you. I mean,
please don't do that. No. Thank you.
It's just you, and it's but you're there. But dude, let's be real. From the jump, I want to ask like how much practice you did before recording something and putting it out, because you were hosting.
Not much.
You were comfortable, it seemed.
This was always, I appreciate that. I don't know if it came
I was going to say, did you feel comfortable?
Did I feel comfortable talking to the cameras? Yes. It's the one. I'm not good at most things. This is the one thing I was born to do. When I was a kid, I was so into sports, but I was undersized and everything. So I played them, but I was average. But like, I had an English teacher who liked me, and he convinced me to do like speech competitions when I was like in fifth grade, where you had to like memorize a speech and perform it. And for 3 years, I won every single one.
Shut up.
And that was like,
see, this is the backstory.
I don't think I've ever said that on a podcast, which is kind of funny.
It starts to add up.
But yeah, so when I was a kid, I could do that. But then, I have like the New Jersey thing. So it's like, I always thought as I got older, I'm like, I'm not good at that, but that's just always me telling me I'm not good at something. But I knew from the reassurance of some friends who had forced me to do this, those guys I mentioned earlier who said, God damn it, Julian, put the fucking camera there and start learning how to do this. I knew from having then done it and what they thought about it that like, okay.
Yeah.
After all the cringing I would do on editing shit, which to this day, I'm used to it, but I still cringe when I edit myself. After that, yeah, I'd get through that and then I could have an honest moment in my head. It's not of arrogance, it's not of anything, but it was like, okay. It started with, you can do this. Like you're not bad at this.
Yeah.
And eventually it was, this might be the thing you're born to do. Right. And that took a while, but those 6 months, you talk about like the mania, I was obsessed.
Yeah.
I was in there 14 to 16 hours a day. And I was just, dude, I could show you this shit. I don't even know what I did, but I was planning out what I would have to do. And you talk about like how easily I was able to like get in there and do that. It was right away. I mean, once I building this, I'm OCD, anxiety, in case anyone can't fucking tell that already. But like building the studio was such a OCD religious experience, and it's not how I would build a studio today, but I was working with an existing room in my parents' house. I couldn't fucking construct the place and all that. And I had to figure out what kind of vibe for myself, forget who else was coming in there, that I wanted to craft to feel like this is for real and this is what we're doing. And it was me, right? And I feel like we did that.
And it looks like it's funny because as we were talking, we'll talk about it later, but I got to spend time with you up in Hoboken now. And
well, at the new one that we just got.
Yeah. But a podcast, and I think it's an art form. It's an expression of yourself.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
That studio is you. And you said to me up there, you're like, I always want to be the kid in my parents' basement.
Exactly.
And even your new studio, it obviously is legit, but it still has that feel.
It doesn't feel like you're walking onto some bullshit set of some channel with 12 producers and whatever.
Yeah.
You know, I appreciate hearing that a lot because that's what I would hope.
Yeah.
Like what you just said is the best reassurance ever.
And you want it to stay that way because that's your comfort zone and then you don't change.
And that's the thing. I was like, I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to launch a podcast at my parents' house. Let's be the #1 show in the world. Fuck, let's get there. I'm going to be a dude in a t-shirt and a backwards hat in his mom's basement launching a podcast, and we're going to figure out how to make this. Oh, and by the way, and this was the backstory, the name I initially had was Trendifier.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Which is probably the worst name in American history for anything. But, you learn to love it like a redheaded stepchild. But I always knew it would change. The reason I had that name is because my dumbass in January, when I was at the bottom of the pit, right, before the podcast, before the pandemic, was panicking because all my jobs opportunities like weren't there. My life was in shambles, and I'm like, I got to do something. I had a workout where I had way too much C4, and then was like so stressed that like I didn't even work out all the way. So I got home and I'm just like jacked running around the place. I'm like, oh, what can I do? I'm like, well, I'm a writer. All right, I'm going to write shit. I'm going to blog about shit. I'm like, oh, that means I need a domain. Oh my God, I got to buy a domain. Fuck, I need a domain that's 10 characters or less. Fuck, I need something that's like a word no one uses. And trend. We're going to write about trends. What's trend? What's another word? Oh, trend, identifier, trend, trendifier, $10? No, it's 1,000. Fuck it, let's buy it.
You bought it?
I bought it. And so then I buy all the equipment, and now I'm doing the podcast on March 13th. And what do I not have left over? Money.
Yeah.
And at this time, I actually thought you needed like, I was so stupid. I thought you needed like IP of having like a website like trendifier.com.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you stupid fuck. Now you don't have any money and you still need to get the podcast name and you own this domain for Trendifier, which I had to practice how to spell it. And I'm like, if you can launch a podcast out of your parents' house with only in-person guests and a backwards hat and a t-shirt with a name like Trendifier, I guess anything can happen, right?
Yeah.
Fuck it, let's do it.
Yeah.
So that was the story. That's what I did. It was like a little self-punishment for myself, but learned to love it. And we launched it with that. And those 6 months were just random building, planning. And then once I got to the summer, I started recording what was going to be the first 10 episodes because I wanted to launch with 10 day one.
That's something that I haven't seen anybody else do.
Well, I wanted to show I was serious. All video, multiple angles, everything. And I didn't want to tell anyone about this. So I was
Yeah.
self-taught. I was using Reddit forums and shit. I didn't know shit about fuck with this. When we used to do like these filmings at these events, it would be like we'd bring a producer and he'd set up the mic, set up the cams and I'd be like, we good? He's like, we good. And then I just start talking. I didn't know how any of it worked. I didn't know how, all this shit I've showed you before. I didn't know any of that. So I would just sit up late at night obsessively and study it and ask questions on Reddit threads, turn up the volume at 100 decibels and compare it to other types of sounds so that I could get a different sound that was my own.
And so that's like your OCD kicking in.
Yeah. The OCD.
I don't know too much about OCD, to be honest, I mean, disease isn't the right word, but a condition.
I don't care what you call it.
I
don't know what it is,
but people say OCD, and I mean, everyone can say like they want something a certain way. But when I spent that time up with you,
you saw it.
I saw it in a way that I've never seen it before. It was, you were going frame by frame, talking about where the words were, explaining how it all worked, and it had to be perfect. And I called my buddy Grady, who's out in LA, and he does a bunch of movie production type stuff. And I called him. I was like, dude, I just spent time with this guy. And I was like,
he's
now
out of his fucking mind.
And I was like, now I know what you're doing out there. I was like, I had no idea what the editing of a movie or what editing anything. And it's like but part of I think what makes your podcast really cool and has made it probably stand out from others is the clips, is the editing, is the introductions, because it's a presentation. Yeah. It's a movie, and it's an experience where you get a little bit of background, and I do the thing with I record and just like some people do and do an introduction. You did a little bit of that, but then once you started getting to the premiere type trailers.
Well, there's a lot of in between that though.
Yeah.
I appreciate all that. Thank you.
But you tried different things, it sounded like.
Oh yeah. You have to look. For those 6 months when I was building alone, the thing about building alone is the only crowdsourcing you're doing is what you come up with in your mind to put out on the internet to random people you don't know to try to come back with something, but you don't really know shit. So like you have to throw yourself in the fire. I threw the 10 out there. One of them was my cousin Sydney. I was producing music for her in the studio that summer. And so one day when we were there, I was like, fuck it, let's practice. I said, let's do a podcast. So she was like technically the first guest. 8 of the episodes were solos, which were all ideas that I had to like communicate about for an hour and hope it wasn't cringe. And then the 10th was shortly before I launched. You remember that was the summer of all the riots and everything. So I had my buddy Terrence, who's legit like been involved in civil justice issues forever. Like he was literally involved with the NAACP when he was like 12, right? Someone who really walked the talk on things in such a well thought, calm voice at a time where no one was calm.
Yeah.
And we did a 2.5 hour podcast together, and we could have gone on for hours and hours and hours. And I decided to make that the 10th of the 10 episodes I put out day one. And so again, I was thinking I was going to have to do 30 solos before anyone would come in.
So day one, you put out 8 solo episodes and then 2 interviews.
The same second. Hit the play button at like 7 o'clock at
and
night.
What was the reality? Like, because like one of the things personally, what I've experienced is like so much love from friends and family, and just like when I put out that first episode, and my boy Tommy, I've told you about this episode, like people reaching out and saying they listened was like mind blowing to begin with.
Yes,
and then,
I agree.
And then people saying that it was like they enjoyed it. It was a whole nother level. I was high.
That's right.
I was coming off of a manic time of like building this entire thing, and then people liked it. And I remember I hung out with 2 friends that day, and I was just like, I was like almost like crying. Like I was just like, this is nuts. Like I can't believe like the amount of appreciation I had for him coming in and doing that to begin with, but then to put something out that, you were. Personally, I was scared of. Were you scared?
No, I had nothing to lose, man. I was a loser living in my parents' house.
That's what you thought?
Yeah. Still think that.
I know you still think that, which is wild, because going up to Hoboken, you were like, yeah, I still don't. It seemed like you were just starting out. I was like, dude, you have 500,000 subscribers.
Lost 20 grand last month because we didn't do good enough. Shit happens. You know what I mean? You haven't made it, right?
Yeah. But that's the thing, is like, to me, you have. And that's because I'm starting out and I'm in this stage where I'm looking at you like.
Don't think about that. I mean, do whatever you want to do, but
what I'm saying is
I wouldn't have thought about that.
I think it's interesting that no matter how far along on the journey a creative person is, they kind of never really feel. Like, I wonder when you feel like you got to the top of the mountain? Because I'm sure that there's people out there, singers.
Top of the mountain. I've
artists.
never felt. What the fuck you talking? I don't feel like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's like people you don't, and you never really
like
do.
someone will come in for a podcast. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
And then they leave. I like shut the door. I'm like, what an idiot. Not really. Like, but I'm so to this day, I don't care who the fuck it is coming through the door. It could be Michio Kaku, which is hilarious. Like that guy. What a G.
Yeah.
Drove down to my parents' house on a Saturday.
Yeah. Tell that story. Because that you told me a little bit.
Well, let's get there. There's a lot to skip there.
Yeah.
I don't want to like skip the line here, but you know, I'm honored whenever people come there.
Yeah.
And I never, ever want to lose that, no matter what happens, because people are coming in there to talk with me. I mean, you see me, sometimes we put out 2 episodes because someone was in there talking for 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah.
They're spilling their guts when they do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't take that. I don't care what it is. I don't take that lightly.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of like the love of what I do. I get to hear from people, feel them, understand like where they're coming from, what they're about. I don't know. I don't have to agree with everything. People listening don't have to either, and they damn well don't have to agree with me on shit, but we're going to talk it out.
So was that any of your interest beforehand? Because
yes, this is what I did in my job. That was the half of my job that I like. I had to sit down with people without the mics, without the fucking headphones, without the cameras, and get to them. Understand what they were about. If you walk in there and be like, I'm going to go get your business right now, you ain't getting business.
Yeah.
Bro. You're probably not getting business anyway, because you don't get a lot of business in most conversations. And that's what I wasn't good at with my job. I never thought about people transactionally. And it was a business that wanted you to think about people transactionally. And I had no ability to do that. I appreciated people for what they brought to the table, for what kind of person they were, for the good, for their flaws, right? And I just had an intense connection with people. And like even, you know, I mean, Christ, all the fuck ups I had in my life with women were all because I didn't do that. But when I didn't fuck up, it was because it got to that point so fast. You're not thinking about, you know, what size are her tits, you know, what does she look like? There's none of that. It's like
human connection.
Who are you? What are you about? And it's got to be genuine. You can't like. That's the beauty of doing like a 3-hour podcast or something. Or again, take away the mics, take away the cameras, pretend you're on a couch with somebody. That's the beauty of doing a 3-hour conversation. You can't really hide in that.
Yeah.
Has
the business side taken away from that at all?
No.
The stress or the
no
expectations.
No.
That's
the
nice.
only thing is there high stress at details during the production? Yes, it's been that way for a long time though. It's been that way since in production, like while we're recording, it's been that way since the beginning in a lot of ways, but especially since about probably episode 87.
Because that's another thing. You did it all. You did the filming, editing.
I still do.
Producing.
Yeah, we just bought an ATEM. So I have my guy, Allergy, who kills it. Shout out Allergy Alaman. Just great kid who wants to learn and
a nice guy.
is in there, you know, doing whatever he can to help support this thing and has sacrificed for himself to help me build this year. Until April, it was all me doing it. He actually launched a fan page last year where he just was learning how to make little shorts and did an amazing job. Got some subs and followers on YouTube and TikTok, which had to help the show. And, you know, outside of that, for 3 years, it was all me from April 2020 to April 2023. Yeah. And then I brought him in and he really, I mean, he gets better and better and better. So, you know, that's been a big help, but learning the details of it, he's got to see, because I've known him for a while, he's got to see what it progressed from. He found me early. He found me December 2020, right? Like shortly after I started. So this kid has seen the show since the 20s, right? We're in like the 170s now or something.
Yeah.
So it's stuff like that's pretty gratifying. But we didn't, you know, when I launched, it was, to go back to what you were saying, like, oh, were you scared or whatever? I didn't have anything to lose, man. Like I just had to do it. And, you know,
how'd you handle the response? Like, what was the response?
It was good, but I'm separated, bro. I'm living in a studio. I'm on an island.
Yeah.
And I was honored by how much support from friends and family there was, just like you said. Like blew my mind how incredibly supportive everyone was. And some people were like, I don't know what he's doing, but he's good at it. He'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And but I'm human too. And one thing about me before doing this, and I'm sure it comes across in the fact that I chose this as a career, is I'm a social butterfly.
Yeah.
Right? I'm the guy in a different city every week. I had the beautiful problem of having way too many friends. And I need to harp on the point that the majority of people, whether it be close or loose friends, and obviously all family, were supportive and continue to be to this day. In little ways. I don't need you listening to me. You can fucking call me up.
Yeah.
Like whenever I have a friend, at every point in this podcast, when I'd have a friend call me up, like, yo, I listened to that episode. I'm like, you did what? Like you could, like, you know what I mean? When you know someone, you don't listen. You can fucking call them up. You don't need to listen to their podcast. I'd be like, really? You did?
And there's so many things in the day that they could be doing.
Yes, exactly.
And to me, it hits every time.
I never expected that. I never expected them to listen to it. But like from a support standpoint of like, oh, like you'd support a friend in a career. I had so much of that.
Yeah.
But we're negatively wired naturally as humans, right? Mm. And the hurt hurts more than the thrill helps.
A lot more.
Okay? And so, yeah, were there people who to this day, fucking 4 years in, have never so much as sent me a text? Never. I mean, I'd have to go check this because I can't say this definitively, but probably have never liked the post I've put up. Never called me.
Yeah.
Not like people who I took calls for in the middle of the night to go where they are. Those kind of people.
Yeah.
Are there a handful of those? Yeah, there are. And does sometimes when I'm sitting up late at night, am I looking at that phone wanting to call them and say, what the fuck? Yeah, I do. I never have.
Yeah.
But
why do you think that is? Because we've talked about the war of art, and that's in that book. It's like that. This is what's going to happen when you chase your own pursuit. And
it's a reflection on them, not you. But that's hard to accept.
Yeah.
You want to think it's because you're slighted and like you did something wrong, and they're calling you out for it, and they're sticking a finger in your face, and they're really not. They're probably not thinking about you much.
Yeah.
But there's something in us as humans that bothers us, that people can't just say, hey, good luck.
Yeah.
Hey, love what you're doing. Hope you're doing great.
Yeah. And
it's just not a hard thing.
It's funny you say that about even like a like. It's support.
I'd have to go check
any
that
support
one, to be honest with you, but
still, it's just like, and even on the positive side.
Yeah.
Like that's support, and that's something that
there's 15, 20 people.
Yeah.
That pop into mind. There's other ones who are more loose that I wouldn't really expect.
But that's another thing I wanted to get deeper on with you is growing up being an only child and how you became a social butterfly. Because like those two things to me don't, because like when you're growing up, the people I've met that are only children, they're like, yeah, I was in my basement by myself, and you're just in your own head, and you're not talking to. You're probably talking to yourself.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it's like
you're definitely talking in your head all the time.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So like that's another thing. But you were always that way since kindergarten. You talking like?
I've only ever lived between my two ears, so I can speak to that. And then the rest of it is speaking to what other people have told me and assuming they're telling the truth. But only children can kind of cut either way. They could be the loner or they could be the people watcher, right? Which can make you social.
Yeah.
And so I had to entertain myself. Especially I ended up going to school like a half hour away in middle school. So not to make this sound sad or anything, it was perfectly fine. But I had to get used to spend a lot of time alone. Yeah. Right. And I was always so fascinated by people. And that's part of the creative side, right? I used to, I read a lot. I watched a lot of movies. I was so curious. I had such terrible ADD that I'd just be like all over the place, wondering things all the time. And so one of my quote unquote love languages was quality time. Mm-hmm. For sure. Of the 5, that was one of them. I have some dominant ones, and that's definitely a dominant one. And I always felt alive around people. I think I craved that in a lot of ways. And my parents also would put me into situations where I had to mingle with adults a lot. right? Because I'm with them.
That's something that makes sense.
You were telling me your parents would throw you in situations like that too, and that's why you're so good with people.
You were an adult before you were an adult, and you have to have adult conversations, which I think is phenomenal for kids to do. I've actually heard somebody talk about that as something as small as making kids order at a restaurant, making them speak to the waitress, and all these things today with kids just diving into iPads, I think is going to take away from a lot of that.
Yes,
but making them be adults. And my dad's always shake a hand, look them in the eye.
That's great, man.
And it's
good parenting.
Yeah, and but it helped with people, and I didn't realize that at the time.
Yeah,
and I wonder if you either realized that was going on, or you're just like, because I was thinking about it, I was like, you were probably at so many like family parties or something like that, or just along with your parents, where all adults, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think about it, but it's funny. When I go into a room, I'm either like on fire or ice cold.
Really?
Can't talk to anybody. It's very bizarre, but I'm a social animal. When I know the people, it's totally different. I'm good, right? We're good. But when I walk into a room where I don't really know people, it really depends on the first person I get a hold of to talk to, and if there's a vibe there. If there's not, I'm fucked. I'm like, what am I doing here? I gotta go.
Wow.
Right? So it goes either way. But yeah, like, am I good with people, and can I hold? I mean, I would hope so. It's what I do for a living, right? But I mean, as an only child, that was a big part of my identity and what it's about. But I also subconsciously understood, and then made myself in my 20s consciously understand. But I realized that you always knew this. I was a different cat. Not always, not in like the good ways either. Sometimes like all over the place. I was just a different kind of dude. I was.
In what ways? Yeah.
I don't know. I'm quirky. That OCD is definitely something that's a separator.
How would your friends describe you? Your closest?
Oh my God.
Your closest friends. Like, what would they like?
That's just Jules, man. That's probably what they'd say. I'd love to know that. I don't know that I've ever asked them that, so I'm gonna ask them that. But that's not really a question. Like,
I don't think I've ever asked it either. But
I'm gonna ask some of my boys that afterwards. They're like, this guy, this fucking guy. Like, that's probably about it. But like, my friends and my family are everything to me, and I'm so fortunate to have so many amazing people. And you know, their successes are my successes, and their struggles feel like my struggles. And I think that's that could be a heavy thing in life, but it's also a beautiful thing, because you want to talk about feeling bonds with people and knowing that like there's some sort of connection that as an only child you're able to form with other people. Family, it's kind of forced when you're a child, obviously, but especially with friends, you develop that shit, and you're like, oh, wow. I spent so much time alone as I was growing up, yet I was able to do that. It's so cool. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's definitely, there's an independence you have to form as an only child. That's huge. Yeah. I'm very grateful for that.
And I was gonna say, I mean, so obviously being a podcast that focuses on the topic of mental health, throughout your journey, it's lonely. And that's something I think that people might not realize about somebody who's doing something like you're doing. Yeah. You're talking to people every day, or not, maybe every day, but a couple times a week, 3 to 4 hours, you're getting to see them. But like, outside of that,
when they leave,
you're alone. And when I left that Sunday, that's what was going through my head. I was like, damn, like, I mean, I had such a good time. I was taking notes. I was learning everything that I could and soaking it in. And when I left, I was like, on my drive home, I was like, Julian's still making thumbnails. I'm like, and you had made 26 before I left. And then when I saw it like 6 or 7 hours later on the premiere, I was like, oh, it's a completely different thumbnail than you were working on the entire time.
If you're asking me if I talk to myself when you leave, absolutely. Not just in my head either. Yeah. Yes, look.
That's more common, which is crazy, because I've never done that, but that's so much more common than I had ever realized.
I actually, this is a little bit of a different wavelength of that, but one of the reasons I'm able to express myself pretty well on podcasts is because I will go into practice mode without being like, I'm going to go practice. But I will work out. When you hear yourself talk out loud, I will pace around my apartment and I will work out a new argument for something that's happening. And you are forced to hear, and sometimes I will record it, and you are forced to hear how eloquently or absolutely bullshit terribly you are able to make this point or defend this point, especially when it's something new that's happening out there that you're forming an opinion on. And I'm convinced, because I've always done that, I'm convinced that is part of why I'm able to do what I do, because I will be like, as you're talking to yourself, because it's like you're having a conversation with an imaginary person. I'm not having a conversation with myself.
Yeah.
I'm doing it as if there's someone walking next to me or whatever. You're working it out.
And you're actually playing it. That's so funny that you
Yes.
say it, because I do that all the time, but I do it on the phone with friends.
Well, that's the thing.
And I'm like,
I do it more on the phone with friends,
yeah.
but I'm saying I do it that way too.
But that's funny, because when I started practicing, I would just hit record and look into the camera on my laptop. I'd have a cup of coffee. I'd put it right on that Nike box, and I'd record. And I did it every single morning at 9 a.m. I literally like.
See, that's better, because you're in the spot simulating it. I never do that. I gotta like. I always told people, my buddy Danny Jones knows this. He's got a great podcast called the Danny Jones Podcast. But if podcasting were able to be up and walking around, I'd be so dangerous.
Yeah.
It's not even
I always
fun.
thought, like,
I'm terrible sitting down talking. I don't talk with people on the phone sitting down ever. I'm walking.
Yeah. And let's get to this. You're the fastest walker I've ever seen. I walk fast.
Really?
You're speed walking, and I'm trying to. Like,
I was trying to walk slow for you.
I'm trying, but I appreciate that, because
I'm notorious with that. I've broken some people's feet.
People tell me I walk fast, and I do. I know I walk fast, but
That's an only child thing.
Yeah.
Because I walked alone and I like to move. Like when I'm going through the gym, I'm trying to get from thing to thing, and people.
Yeah.
It's moving. Like something is putting these people in front of me to stop me from getting that next piece of equipment to teach me patience.
Yeah.
But like I see like some of the people at the front desk, they're like they're watching me like, this fucking guy walks so fast through this place. But
so is that your thing? Is that how, like, because again, back to like mental health, you seem to be somebody who takes physical health extremely seriously.
I do.
And that's your, like, we were talking about having, and by the time this is out, the last episode will be with Jim. We'll get to Jim and your relationship with him. But we were talking about how you just need something. Everybody needs something. And it seems like your something to keep your head straight is working out.
Yeah, because ironically, when I went to do this, I lost all of it. And I never took my health for granted before this. But I assumed if I did what I had to do, I'd be good. And, you know, everyone deals with some sort of problem, be it health or something else. So, you know, I don't think like, oh my God, I dealt with this horrible shit. Like I hate talking about it like that. But, you know, before I did this, I was a late bloomer physically, but I worked out like a pro athlete.
Yeah.
I lifted, I worked out often 7 days a week, which actually isn't good, but at least 6. And it'd be lift and cardio. I was a boxer. I mean, psycho with my workouts. I got my body big, you know, in my early 20s and into my mid 20s, like feeling, you know, big relative for me, like feeling good. And it was never about, oh, let me look at my muscles in the mirror. It was about, I wanted to be physically dominant. I wanted to feel like a god when I was doing the things that were then going to go make my life. I wanted to feel healthy and good.
Strong.
And so I was really fortunate to have great stuff. I had some severe shoulder problems. I got reconstruction when I was 22, changed my life. Had a horrible accident when I was 25, ripped it out for the 16th time. It was like down at my elbow. So then I had to get the open surgery there.
Oh, wow.
And we got that fixed. I got back to boxing, got back to everything, got in the best shape of my life by the end of 2019. When my life was getting to the crossroads physically, I was unreal. And suddenly, shortly before the pandemic, I started to have these weird attacks. I couldn't breathe. And I'm like, this is so strange. And so I went to a doctor, a pulmonologist, and I went to the guy's office. I said, look, I'm really sorry if I'm wasting your time right now. I just want to apologize in advance. I'm probably crazy, but I wanted to come by. He's like, no, by all means. And I started telling him the stuff, and I told him my schedule, all that. He's like, no, I'm glad you came in. This is a little bit bizarre. I'm like, okay. And he goes, have you done a breathing test before? I said, no. He's like, Are you willing to do one? Cost some money. I said, fuck it, cash or check. One thing about my health, I never had money, but like if a doctor said, you know, they wanted to do something, I said, cash or check. What do you want?
Yeah.
They'd be like, no, we'll put it through insurance. Don't worry. But so I went and did one of those. And like 2 hours later, I come back upstairs and he comes in the office with like the sheet. And he's like looking at me, which that's not a good look.
And at this point, you're healthy. Like you're in
I'm
a good,
still healthy,
you're in a
but
good spot.
I've been starting to have these attacks and it's freaking me out because then I get tight chest in the gym and my workouts were about 75% right now, which usually they're 100%.
Yeah.
And I was freaked out. And he's like, are you okay? I'm like,
that's what I'm asking you.
He's like, how'd you feel in that breathing test? I'm like, I don't know. Like I was fucking dying. That's why I'm here. And he's like, all right, see, you know what we did there? And I'm like, not really. She said some fucking things. I did it. And he's like, okay, well, what we did is we had you do all these breaths and we measured them. And then we had you do all the same breaths after giving you this thing that basically like opens up your airways. And we measured them. He said it's a percentage relationship. Good, healthy lungs, we want to see 97 to 100% performance on the second round compared to the first, after you get the gas, right? Decent lungs, we want 94 to 97. Slightly misfunction, low asthma, we want 91 to 94. I think these were the numbers. If you're a doctor out there, maybe I'm fucking them up slightly, but it's similar. He goes, definitely, asthma, we want to treat 81 to 91. Pretty hard asthma, 85 to 88. Below 85, you got a problem. He's like, you scored like an 83 or 84.
Damn.
But you're working out like an Olympic athlete. Are you sure you're okay in there? I said, well, doctor, I do feel like I've been fucking dying. He's like, I'm not going to diagnose you with asthma today because the fact that this is new and you've had a schedule like this for 8 years and not had a problem is bizarre. He said, I'm going to give you like some sort of inhaler or whatever, and I want to see how this does. So he gave me one of the basic inhalers that you use in the morning. And I got my workouts up to like 90, 95% by the time the pandemic hit. So I went to see him actually like 2 days before the pandemic.
Okay.
And he was like, okay. It was like a month in. And he's like, all right, we're going to keep monitoring this. I want to talk with you in 3 months now after this. This is interesting. So pandemic hits. I go home to Jersey in April. And in June, I do a long day of work on the podcast. I go down to do a basic workout, home workout in the gym. They were killing me doing those. I hated it. You're using 30-pound dumbbells. There's no bench. But it was better than what most people had. And I start doing basic, rows. And suddenly, and I'm like a little bit of a hypochondriac. So I'm like, but I'm also ironically the last guy who will ever go to the emergency room. Like my arm could be a twig down here like it was one time. And I'm like, I'm fine. And my buddy's like, no, you're going. And then they're fucking doctor's sticking his feet up on my shoulder to like stick it back in an hour later. But I'm like, I go out in the driveway and I'm like trying to let it pass for 20 minutes, but my left arm starts shaking. And I'm like, isn't that a heart attack symptom?
Damn.
Like your left arm starts. I'm like, so my aunt was home and I'm like, you got to take me to the hospital. And she's like, oh my God. Yeah, get the fuck in the car. So we drive to the hospital. We get to the parking lot. I'm like, all right, let's sit here for a minute before I go in and like make this choice. And then I'm still going. I'm like, fuck it. Take me in. So I go in, I'm like pacing. They're like looking at me in the waiting room because I'm walking around, but I'm like pacing and shaking my arm and they're all like nervous. And then after like 10 minutes, they're like, all right, get back in.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I don't know what's wrong with this guy. Take the EKG and they're like, you're a little stressed. But I was feeling good. I was not. It was very weird. Those 6 months leading up to the podcast, no stress, man. Because I felt like I had nothing, like I said, I felt like I had nothing to lose.
That's fine.
I was doing something I liked a lot.
Yeah.
I was loving it actually at this point, and I'm like, things are great. And so they were perplexed, and my uncle is a doctor there, so he took control of the situation, everything, and they sent me home, and they're like, "You're good." I don't know what it is.
They didn't know what it was at that point?
No, and so they didn't know what it was for another year.
No way. I didn't realize that.
So then, I'm still having these attacks when I'm home, but they're not as bad as that one. And I tried to say like, oh, maybe it was the pre-workout. You're always trying to find something. I'm like, it was definitely the pre-workout. So I stopped taking pre-workout. Been taking this shit for fucking 6 years. It wasn't the pre-workout. But that's actually good to cut that out. I never took pre-workout since. That's not a bad thing. But, you know, it would happen. And then as I started the podcast in September, by January, I was dead. I was working a lot, but I was working hard. But I got to the point, I mean, I was a guy who worked out 7 days a week now, you know, maybe it was 3. That never happened, right? And so...
And this the entire time, like, do you know something's wrong? Or you're just like listening to
them,
them,
but
like,
I'm like, it'll pass.
I'll be good.
Yeah. And then I remember I got into early March, and every morning, I was a morning person, right? I used to wake up at 4:45 and go do like hard workouts.
Yeah.
And then maybe do a second one at night once in a while, like an idiot. And I would find myself, my best would be late at night. So I was starting to go to bed at 4 a.m. because my best work happened after 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
I was nobody before 12 p.m. on any given day. I would wake up with black eye. I'm like, what the fuck? And so no doctor could figure it out. And I'm like, I reached a point in March. I said, fuck, I must have cancer. I guess this is it. It's been a good run. What a way to go. This shit's going to happen before I launch this podcast. Never really accomplished anything, but hopefully people will have
10
good
episodes.
I'm like, people, well, at this point I was at like 40 or something. I'm like, people have good memories of me. Hopefully, you know, maybe I'll die young. And what do they say? The good die young? That's cool. So I go to see more doctors. I see my buddy's uncle, who's like an unbelievable pulmonologist, and he's all over it. And he's like, I'm going to concur with what the last doctor said, and I now am going to diagnose you with asthma. You do have severe asthma. But I'm like, how? He's like, you probably always had it, but it got way worse. I'm like, okay. But like, it was never bad.
Yeah.
It happened like that. And so my grandfather had a buddy. He had been a doctor. He had a buddy who was like the head of medicine at Jefferson. And so he has me call him nicest guy ever. This guy, shout out Dr. Kane. Just probably one of the nicest human beings I've ever met in my life, and unbelievable doctor. And that's the great thing. All these doctors I saw along the way, I saw every kind of specialist. They were all amazing.
And this is, so you're saying you're 40 episodes in?
Now I'm like 50 episodes in.
Okay.
This is like late April, or no, it's like early May.
Had you talked about it like publicly at all? Had you said
Not
anything?
really. I don't think I've ever talked about it like this publicly. I've mentioned, I don't like to talk about it, but you're opening me up is what it is. I mean, it's also like,
because I'm just saying from a perspective of knowing, like, again, I'm freaking out. I'm 10 episodes in.
yeah,
To be 50 episodes in and that's going on is
scary.
It's scary, and it's to hide it is the thing. Is to hide it because, again, when you're on camera, it's weird. It's different. It like I lose track of it.
It's hard.
But the before, knowing that you're about to, is like I literally eat differently. I will, again, today I didn't eat until you saw me eat cheese and crackers an hour ago.
Yeah.
Because I knew that I had to have a little bit of a sharper mind than I had the other night because I didn't eat well that day and I felt like an idiot. And like, but there's so many things that you're thinking about as you're about to sit down with somebody for 3 to 4 hours.
A lot of thoughts, yeah.
And you've got this going on, and you got an appointment tomorrow, and then maybe you can't breathe tomorrow.
But I never felt good when someone came. I never had a good day.
That's the
so I
most
never
wild
felt
part.
good
That's the most
when
wild
people
part.
came in, and I just had to like center myself.
Yeah.
And go. And I thought, I mean, to this day, every time I get up from a podcast, I think it's terrible. But back then, I really thought it was terrible. It probably was. But anyway, you were earlier on, and so when people would be like, "Wow, that was really good. I enjoyed that." I'm like, "Really? Great. That's awesome."
I felt like shit.
Okay, cool. But I go to see this guy, and it was like a Kaiser Soze moment. Like, well, you haven't seen any fucking movie. This guy's Max. That every time I say a movie, this guy's like, I haven't seen it.
Well, the most embarrassing one was it when you were about to record. You had, what show did you have on? You had The Sopranos.
Oh, like
on
on the side, like there was like The Godfather playing on the back TV, just like on Amazon Prime. And he's like, what movie's this?
No,
I'm like, get the fuck out.
No, I said, oh, is this The Sopranos?
Yeah, that was it. That was it.
And
I was like,
Alessi looked at me like,
Alessi looked at him like,
yeah, he's just like,
and I'm just like, get the fuck out.
And then from then on, no movies for me.
But yeah, I mean, it was weird. But once I saw the doc, like all of them in those 2 months when I thought like I had cancer, they're like, good news, you don't have cancer. You're going to be all right. I'm like, great, I'm going to live. Wow, this is a W. Like, you sure I'm not dying? They're like, you're not dying, but there is some weird shit going on, but you're not dying. Like, you're going to be fine. I'm like, in my head, I'm still like, all right, so what can it be?
And were they able to like figure it out?
Well, they did. He figured it out. So I'm talking with him and he says, I want you to tell me about the last 2 years of your life. Just go through everything. I'm like, well, that's a podcast kind of question, but okay.
Like,
so we sit there and we start going through it. And so when I was a kid, my best friend, like on a day-to-day, was my dog, Jazzy. She was a golden retriever. I got her when I was 4 years old. She died summer after my senior year of high school. So it's kind of like my childhood.
Wow, yeah,
died right there. It was pretty symbolic. And she was the greatest dog ever, just like the best. Loved her to death. And she, like I said, she was a golden retriever. Golden retrievers shed a lot. This dog slept in my bed. You know, she was my best friend. So I'm going through the whole story and I explain how, now remember, I moved back into my parents' house April 2020. Mm-hmm. In November 2019, my mom got a golden retriever, Maddie, who is also like my best friend now. And I fucking love Maddie. She's like the best, sweetest dog I've ever known.
Same, another golden retriever?
Another golden retriever. And these problems started shortly after that. And so what I was doing, I never came home to South Jersey. Like, I lived up there, but when they got the dog, I was coming home a lot of weekends.
Yeah.
And this doctor, when we start going through it, he like looks up. He like looks over and he goes, "You're allergic to the dog." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "You're not just allergic to the dog, you're allergic to a lot of things."
Damn.
And he starts going through I'm not going to go through every symptom I have, but he starts going through every symptom and he goes, "I need you in to see the allergist immediately."
How do they test that? How does that?
They skin prick, they put needles all over your entire back, all of your arms, and they test every single thing. And so I go into the allergist's office and well, first I said, I'm like, that's impossible. How am I allergic to the dog? And he goes, "What was the one allergy you told me you had as a kid that you got rid of?" I said, "Black cats." I don't know why it was black cats, but around black cats, I would light the fuck up. And then eventually my neighbor had a black cat and I just spent so much time with it, it never bothered me again.
You're a conspiracy
and he
guy.
goes, "What?" I'm not a conspiracy guy. I'm usually shutting him down. But I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "You trained you're a kid. Kids can train their body to deal with an impetus and fight back against it." So he said, "You got this dog at a young age. Your body learned to deal with it." And he said, "You said you were always like stuffed up to this day." I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You think that's normal?" I said, "Yeah. Isn't that like normal?" He's like, "No, that's not fucking normal."
Cold.
Right. I always thought it's normal. It'd be like a little stuffed up. I'm stuffed up my whole life. It's like, that's not normal. But all these other symptoms I never had. So he's like, "Okay. When that dog died, that impetus or whatever it is left your household and your body was like, okay, that's gone, never again. So when your mom gets a dog again years later,
wow,
it now can't fucking deal with it. And when it can't deal with that, it is now sensitive to everything else that you've been able to fight off, be it grass, be it pollen, dust, which is my number one allergy, which is a huge problem.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have like the symptoms are nuts. I would never wish it on anyone. I'm actually starting treatment now where they're going to do immunoallergy shots for 2 years.
So what's the solution?
They just cooked up a serum for me of something I couldn't commit to back then because I was so busy with the podcast. You have to get shots every week in an office. You cannot miss a week or you got to start over. And I said to him at the time, I said, all right, we got to find another way to do this because I work for myself. I have no employees and I'm trying to make it. So can we manage the symptoms? He said, well, now we know what it is. We can at least manage them.
Yeah.
And so it was still bad this whole time. I still wake up with black eyes every day. But, you know, it's like, now we're going to start this. It sucks at the beginning, but knock on wood, hopefully it's going to work. So I actually looked at it as the biggest positive ever. I was like, holy shit, I'm launching this podcast on one leg and we're starting to get there. Imagine what happens when I get healthy.
Yeah.
So we started this talking about health and how that's so important. I'm now back to, because I live right by a gym, to working out in a public gym again, which I love. And I make sure I'm in there at least 5 days a week. And like by anyone else's standards, yeah, I have very intense workouts, but they're probably at about 60% intensity that I used to be. So that's not good enough, but I'm very happy with that. Because for a while I wasn't even doing them.
Yeah.
It's like, try doing home workouts when you're busy building and you're sick all the time.
When's the last time that you felt good? When's the last time that you felt
2019. It's the last time I felt good. Last time I woke up in the morning feel good. Last time I went through a full workout feeling good.
Does that affect your like mental? Because this is what is like mind blowing to me. It's like your mental sharpness on these episodes. And I know you said that you don't prepare for like 99% of them. You don't, you know, do all this crazy research. You're just on top of it. And the amount of things that you know from a variety of different sources, it's mind blowing because you seem very mentally sharp. And the fact that you don't
I appreciate that.
And the fact that you don't feel good and knowing that you feel like not clear is crazy. So
I feel like I really appreciate hearing that. I feel like we're going to be dangerous when I'm fully healthy.
Yeah.
I'm better than I was. Because guess what? I haven't lived with the dog now for a couple months. That was a huge problem. Dust is still a huge problem for me. Yeah. That's my number one. So we got to fix that. But you know, I turned it into a positive because I'm like, this is awesome. So now I appreciate it so much when I get through a workout in the gym. I'm like, yo, your body did that. Cause I need surgery on both my shoulders now because I mean, this is a little bit of a hypothesization. I'm not a doctor in case that's not painfully obvious to people, but I was unfortunately a bit of an unwitting shoulder expert due to all the great doctors I had over the years with all the problems, and I had them fixed, but both of my labrums in the back are now torn just because my body was just weak at all times.
Yeah.
So I don't even know when I did them. It's not like painful, but I can't do pull-ups or my shoulders will come out, and I'm doing all my workouts in a way where things that I love, like be it pull-ups, boxing, which is like my love that I can't do right now because if I throw a hook, the shoulders. I
didn't know that until you said it today.
I'm not doing all that stuff right now because next year these are relatively minor procedures, not minor, but they're easy procedures to do. And if I fuck it up farther, it's not going to be that case. And I'm an unfortunate expert at shoulder rehab, and I don't want to have to do all that. So there's also, there's trade-offs, but I want to make sure I'm getting my heart rate way up and getting the sweat in and, doing, all right, we're not doing crazy heavyweight, but I want to do midweight. I want to do at least 40 sets when I'm in there of, different body parts or whatever. So getting back to that in a public gym setting with real equipment and stuff has been great.
But so what is this? That. Like you speak lightly about it, you make jokes and stuff like that, but like, what did this do for your perspective on life? Because it is intense. What you just explained there. I mean, that's a lot. That's and again, as you're creating,
I have it so good, man.
That's the thing, though.
I have it, but here's the thing.
Because where does that come from?
Am I a human? Do I complain sometimes? Do I get really annoyed when I wake up in the morning? Am I usually in a bad mood? Yes, but like I get over it.
Yeah,
because it's perspective, bro. Yeah. There's people out there trying to grind to put a roof over their head. Look at me. I got to live under my parents' roof. I could have never, let's make this very clear. The help that I had to launch this, having a roof over my head from my parents, not having to pay rent for the first time in my adult life, podcast doesn't happen without that.
Yeah.
Period. End of story. That is like being born on second base, having parents who are willing to let you do that.
That's awesome.
Okay. So the advantages I have had that other people don't. The worst I got to deal with is some allergies. It's not even cancer. Come on, bro.
Yeah.
You can deal with that. Like, trust me. it's not always like this. Like, yes,
Yeah.
I'm still human. I'm a bitch
was-
sometimes. I complain. You heard me talking about the drama just now on it. But at the end of the day, like, I'm living, I'm breathing.
But so that, but did it
you know,
make
it's
you,
fine.
did it make you more grateful, or you were already just like that? You were already.
It probably made me more grateful.
Yeah.
I was never like ungrateful. But I think it made me more present. Like now,
Yeah.
as dumb as this sounds, sometimes when I actually have what I deem now, like at this time with the limitations to be a good workout, I'll walk out of the gym and I'll say thank you to my body.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I'll be like, yo, good job.
Yeah.
Like, not to me, like to my body. Like, thank you, shoulders, for not popping out when I pushed the limit a little bit too much there on the bench. I know I'm not supposed to do that right now, but thank you.
Yeah.
You know, like, thank you for rolling there and staying 40 minutes on the elliptical today and actually like getting new ideas flowing through your head because you got in the zone. I appreciate that a lot.
And I think that has a lot to do with feeling present, feeling in your body, understanding your body. And I think that's something that I've mentioned this before, but playing lacrosse and being forced to work out in college.
Yes.
Up at 4:35 a.m.
Yes.
Going and working out, and you're with 50 dudes. It's the best thing in the world.
Yes, it is.
It's absolute ecstasy when you're in there and you're half asleep. Maybe you're out the night before, but like that feeling is awesome. And then when that feeling goes away, I didn't want to work out.
It's hard to replicate it.
I still have never gotten back into besides during COVID, got into a crazy.
Because you
workout
always
phase.
had to do it.
Exactly.
And you got to do it with like your fraternity of friends, right? Like
and that's like when I see videos of guys, whatever football teams or anybody like that, when like somebody's on the bench or somebody's on the squat rack and everybody, like the whole gym is cheering them on. It's
oh
the
my
most,
God. It's
and
the
like
best
to
thing
feel
ever.
that, and not even to be the one doing it. Like that happened a couple times, which is dope, but like just to be there with your boys. And that's what we were talking about kind of on the way up of like, you know, you can't replicate that feeling of being in high school or college and having living with your friends, and
it's the best,
and it goes away, and it
goes away, but the memories of that are incredible. And dude, what you just said, so spot on. I'll say it from the second hand, unlike you. Like most of my best friends in college were D1 AA football players, right? And that camaraderie that they all had to do it. And I got to see what that was like for them. I didn't get to do it. Now, there's a lot of people on campus who think I was a 4-string quarterback. That got me around a little bit. But, you know, outside of the fake facade we put up to, you know, close at the bar a little bit, you know, I only got to see it secondhand. But that I was thinking to myself, because I went and worked out myself. And I was wondering, I'm like, damn, these guys have been doing this for like, let's say the last 12 to 14 years of their life. Are they going to be able to do it when they don't have that anymore? And it's really like half and half. Half of them are really great with it. Half of them, you know, it's hard to get back up to that, you know?
And it's that top, I feel like it's that top quartile that keeps it going. And then it's that the next is just like, it's just, to me, it wasn't about that. And like we were even talking about, just being rooting for your boys, even if it's outside of the weight room, right? Little things like that.
Yes.
Like, it just, you're so close. And even like when my friends would land a job right out of college, it's like, what are the guys? You know what I mean? It's like, let's go. You know,
let's fucking go, man.
It's awesome.
I remember all of us leaving for the interviews, like in the none of it. We're like, how do we put on a suit? What do we?
Yeah.
Does this button go here? We're like, fuck it. All right, we'll figure it out. Literally, we lived in a house called the Deli, and it was the Meat Squad. That's like what people called it. Yeah. And here we are sticking on suits, going to interviews. Like something's wrong here.
Dude, isn't it so funny about college? You feel like you're such a man. You feel like, at least that's what I thought I knew everything.
Like the man or a man?
Like I feel like, again, you're like, you can kick people out of parties.
I felt more like bro being dudes. You know what I mean? Rather than like, I felt like we were idiot kids. Like I never felt like a man was like when I went out in the world and saw the guys in suits. I'm like, sir, yes, sir, you're doing a great job.
That's probably a product of, I went to a small school. There's 1,200 kids, played on the lacrosse team, very historic program. And it was like, there was no football team, there was no wrestling team. It was the lacrosse team.
Relax, bro.
Exactly. And that reputation works against you for sure. But it also, you know, helps out. And that's the thing, is we're the biggest team on campus. Yeah. There was nobody else that had basketball team had like 20 guys. Right. You know, and they're 6, 7. So
You were the man.
That's you felt like you were,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
you
yeah.
realize you get out of that like, wait, no,
You're like, you ain't shit.
no, we're not, no, we're
Yeah,
not,
yeah,
and like
yeah.
I know nothing. Like and also that's kind of like the testosterone. That's like what you're going through.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah,
There's a lot of that. My one buddy Dylan used to have a quote. One of my friends was named Meat. Is exactly what you think he was. He was the one non-Jersey like type. He was a redneck from Maryland who was a 6 foot, 260 pound fullback, 5'11", 260 pound fullback who squatted like 700 some pounds and would smoke a cigarette while doing it. But my buddy Dylan, he later lived with me after college. That was quite an interesting time. But my buddy Dylan used to have a quote: if people recorded our conversations, none of us would have jobs and Meat would be in jail. And I'm like, yes, that is true, because we were not men. We were just fucking idiot college kids who absolutely had no intellectual thoughts about anything. And we're just, keg stands and having a good time. But we got our work done. They worked hard on football, right? I also worked out in the gym, stay fit and whatever. So and act like the 4-string quarterback, but also we got our work done, right?
Say,
like everyone did pretty well in school.
You were an academic guy. You cared.
I did. I got by on having a photographic memory, though. I should have worked a little harder. Like I should have.
So that's the thing. That's like hearing you talk about episodes, and like I could bring somebody up and you're like, oh yeah, that was episode 42. Just like,
timestamp.
Yeah, the time.
57.
The timestamp. Yeah, it's just like that's a thing though. Is that?
I thought everyone had that until like probably about 5-6 years ago. I thought everyone could do it. I guess that's an only child syndrome, but I have an audio visual memory. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
It's very bizarre, but I could tell you. Say an episode number.
45.
45 was Ashton Larold at about the 50 to 60 timestamp. He started going into his suicidal ideations as a teenager. And then I remember somewhere maybe at like the 2 hour and because that was a 3 hour and 30 minute ish podcast. And somewhere like maybe the 2:40 mark, he started talking about like political commentators, and we started going back and forth on some voice vocals of what those guys sounded like. Like I can just pull shit like that.
Your impressions.
I could. Yeah. I
so
could
wait, sorry. So like
remember that
92.
92 was David Satter at the 1 hour and 15 minute. Go check these. 1 hour 15 minute area. He was talking about the stories of different Vladimir Putin hits that happened, including to his friend and the journalist Anna Politskaya, who was killed in her home. And then at the 1 hour 40 area, he was talking about MH17, which was shot down over Ukraine. Somewhere in that third hour, I want to say it was the 2:30 mark, it was the one cold take he had. He defended the war in Iraq, which was not the best, but I love David. Great guy.
So
but I could just run through the episode.
I'm going to I'm going to run through the numbers.
Okay.
27.
27 was Michael Sahagan.
32.
That's my butt. Oh, you just want the names. 32 was Dr. John Schneider, PhD.
98.
98 was, well, I did them out of order. So Bustamante was 97. 98 was Kevin Donaldson. 99 was Andy Greenberg 1.
That's ridiculous. I've done 10 and I forgot which one. But that's crazy. That makes a lot more sense about the information that you're able to pull out of. Because, dude, I was telling you that Will Tom's is going to be coming on.
Great guy. Episode 67.
Yeah. So I watched the first, I don't know, maybe hour.
Shout out, Will. Love that guy.
Yeah, he was awesome. I got to sit next to him at dinner and just hit it off. And
self-made dude, man.
I can't wait to hear the story. But in that episode, he pulled up a picture. I think this was the right episode. We'll see how my memory is. And you're like, oh, is that like Sigmund Freud down there next to Einstein? And I'm like, what? Like, how do you you have so many moments. Do you even notice that?
No.
That you do that you have?
I notice when it's like a timestamp type thing, but I guess I don't notice the other ones.
I guess that's because it's, again, you've always lived in your brain and you don't realize that that's not normal.
It's
because the information that you regurgitate and the things that you say, I'm just like, I'm laughing. And that's why I was shocked that you don't really prepare in the way that I have prepared
I
for
don't
a
have
lot of
time
these.
to. I run the whole podcast. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? I'm trying to hand that stuff up. I'd love to prepare more.
Yeah.
Like there was one the other day I set aside the day before to prep for it. It's
Yeah.
the first time I prepped for. I think I've prepped for like 4 podcasts before.
Yeah.
The first one, ironically, didn't go well because I spent a month prepping and I did a really bad job because I was like
You're over-prepared?
over and I was stressed because I thought we had to all get it in one podcast and I was so nervous about it that like the guests loved it because I knew his whole case and whatever.
Yeah.
But like it's the whole time it's like, so what about that time where you did that thing with, you know, it's
Yeah.
like it was too much.
So I
But
just have a completely different question out of anything. Like, what is it that you think makes a podcast great, a host great? What do you think that it is? Because there's a lot of different guys that do it different ways. You know what I mean? Like we've talked about Lex Friedman. He's sitting there with a notebook and
they
tons
do
of
it different
research.
ways.
And Joe Rogan seems to just not do much.
You don't prepare.
And then there's in between, there's structured ones. There's even like I don't want to say New York Times, but there's like the ones where
Narrative driven.
they like pre-record the interview and then they put
yeah.
sound bites in.
Yes.
Like what is it on the whole that makes one good?
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that question. To speak to my own and ones that may do the free flowing type,
Yeah,
like
long,
it.
long form.
The one thing that I've cared about all my life is that things feel real. And to give you an example of that, I love movies, right?
Yeah.
I appreciate great art. Peter Jackson's trilogy that later then had a prequel, The Lord of the Rings, is unbelievable. He's an incredible director. He did an amazing job. When I was a kid, I watched them all once. Never watched them again. Don't have an interest in watching them again. A lot of great actors in there I like. It's not real, though. That doesn't happen. It's not fairy tale world where there's fucking goblins flying around. So I can't distort my mind's eye. Like Game of Thrones, never got into it. Heard amazing things. I'll bet it's one of the best shows ever made. Not for me, right? I like shit that's raw and real. I don't ever like things that are fake. That's why I didn't like things on TV. Reality TV, I can't even like process that shit because it's all scripted and everything. I wanted it to feel like we sat down and the only thing that ever changed about me, Julian, was that the cameras went on and we now had mics in front of us and everything else was exactly how it was my entire life, having conversations with people. In fact, we even had headphones now, so it could be even more personal.
Yeah.
And so the quote I had, and I get a chill and like goosebumps every time I get a DM about it or a comment about it. And people will say this quote. The quote I had before I started the podcast was I wanted people to feel like they were there at the table with us.
Yeah. And that's why
I
you care
get
about
it all the time.
And that's
I
why you care
love
about
it.
the audio in a way. And that's the thing.
Yes.
It's like when we were up there and you're showing me, I'm like, I got this little Steinberg, shout out my boy Aiden who loaned me that. You got the mixer and you're telling me about all the ins and outs and you're telling me about the sound and this and that. And I'm like, dude, I have no idea what you're talking about. To me, people told me the audio we're doing sounds great. And
We
I'm
fixed your audio today.
Yeah.
When I came in here, I'm like, this is all wrong. We got to, oh my God, we're only working with this. All right, we'll figure it out.
But you explained the sound and you said you want people to feel like they're there.
Yes.
And the fact that there's a difference and like now that you're starting to explain some of these things to me, just like I said with the editing and the cuts and this and that, I'm starting to pick up on these things. Haven't gotten the sound one yet, but when you turned this up, I was like, oh, this is great. Like I could,
Imagine that. You turn the volume up, you're louder.
Yeah.
Max is back there like, I only fucking told you this 20 times.
Join the audio engineer. But that's funny that you wanted it to feel like, because it does feel like that. And
I appreciate that.
And
I will never not appreciate that compliment when people say that. That's
really
like,
funny.
that's all we want. That's all. Don't say anything else. That's all we want.
And because that's another thing that you were showing me was they're like, this is so funny. I could have written like a short book about watching you work that weekend because it was so nuts. There's the amount of things that
Please don't do
that. No, but I was saying like the amount of things that were when you were finally got the clip done, you're like, all right, let's watch it on the phone. Let's watch it on the computer. Put your headphones in. Let's test it with that. And I'm like, what? Like this is all the stuff that's going through your head. And it made me laugh because one of the first conversations we had, you're like, if you lived in my head, like you wouldn't want to live in my head. And that's when I saw, I was like, oh shit, man, he's thinking about everything. Like all
torture.
Yeah.
I mean, when I'm audio engineering during podcasts, I don't want to. I'm bringing in. I have the guy. He's great. I'm bringing in a guy. Like we're on a little bit of a tough time on YouTube right now, so we're getting that fixed. And once I have that turned around, I'm gonna pay a lot of money to bring in a guy for as long as it takes to his job. He's an audio genius, right? His job is to keep my audio the same as it is, the same sound. He's also probably going to make me upgrade some of my equipment and get it to a point where I don't have to ever worry about it during a podcast, because the way, I don't need to get into the terminology, but the way that I do my audio, it's like you're standing right at the edge of the cliff. You're at the best cliff ever, but you're leaning over it. And all it takes is a little push and you go over it, and now it's not good, right? So because of, I'll put one term on it, because of, for example, one of the things is like the compression I use. I go for a high volume, and that means you can clip it easily, which means it can distort it and sound like when someone talks too loud. You know what I'm talking about.
Max
right?
shaking his
Max
head.
is shaking his head like I know exactly. So when I'm in a podcast, you will see me sit there. It's on camera. A lot.
You're moving.
Like you'll see me watching their. I have to process what they're saying and be present, watch their decibel levels, move their volume accordingly, sometimes adjust their compression, change off the mute if like something really loud is happening outside the studio that's getting through. There's so much happening. I'm like, I don't want to fucking have to do any of that. I'm worried about the cameras. I don't want to have to do any of this.
So that's what you're doing when you're when they're making a point and you can tell they're about to get up.
Yes, I'm anticipating it.
Wow.
There's too much in my head.
That's what I said
man.
because when I was there and I saw you do your thing, I was just like, dude,
There's too much
you're
in my
doing-
head.
Yeah, you're doing
It's
so
not.
much.
It's not. And it's
You got
stupid.
the computer over here.
It's stupid.
You got the computer over here. You're pulling stuff up.
Yep.
You're doing
I'm
that.
watching the production on the
Yeah.
computer.
Somebody
I'm
honks
pulling
2
stuff
miles
up.
away.
Yep. Yep. It's like, it's so like, God bless Alessi for dealing with it. He sees it every day.
Yeah.
Like,
So, all right. So we're gonna
You
get
saw
back,
it for a weekend.
We're gonna
but
get back to you. What have you learned about yourself from doing this entire thing? Was there any point where you thought that you were gonna fail? Was there any point that you even considered failure? Was there a point where you?
Never had a choice on considering it. I had to make it. I still haven't made it, but never thought about that. Do you have dark times? Yeah, you have dark times. I mean, you and I were talking about it. I'm having one right now.
Yeah.
It's all relative. You know, this would have been amazing a year ago where we're at, but
Yeah.
like relative to what we are right now and where the expenses now are on the show, you know, we got to get through this one, but you have dark times and you persevere. You know, I don't know if that's a great question. And that's a fuck up on my part. I haven't had time to assess anything.
That's what I've gathered.
That's a big fuck up on my part. I just don't, my brain doesn't turn off. I'll sleep okay with the allergies, wake up with the black eyes, but I can actually stay asleep. But getting to the point where I go to bed to sleep is hard. And I'm just constantly, oh my God, frame 57 in the second hour. We didn't switch that over. That was really important to do that because that's going to hit at the beginning of a clip. And if it doesn't hit, then it's not a good hook and no one's going to watch it. It's going to have 84% watch time instead of 98% watch time. It's only going to go to 1 million people instead of like 5 million. That's not,
I don't want to be
not
in
a
your
good
head.
way to live. Like these are the thoughts that have to be some of the OCD, I guess. But you know,
But it's a
again,
blessing.
shout out to my guys for dealing with it because they're fun, and including like some of my contract editors, Akshat and Adam, they're like living saints because they don't know the meaning of the word. No, they just say, no problem, Julian, every time. And like, I'll give them the most inane shit. And they're like, we got it.
Yeah.
You know? And like I said,
Have you called Alessi when I was up there?
exactly. You heard it.
Yeah.
And like, you see me like next to the phone like this.
And he's just like, all right.
Goose frappa. And he's like, we got it. He'll be like, we got it. Relax. And he called me today. He was lining up the audio on a new app for the first time that even I haven't used. And it's the first time we don't have audio bars to line up against. And I'm a stickler for the mouth being at the same exact time as the sound. I can't stand it when it's not like that. He called me up. He was supposed to come over on Sunday. We were going to do it. He called me up today. I'm like, so what are you doing? He's like, I'm 3/4 of the way through the edit. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, don't worry.
Yeah.
I got it lined up. I'm like, Alessi, if this isn't lined up, I'm really sorry. You're going to have to start over. He's like, trust me. It's now. He's told me that before, and then it's not right. But, I'm sure it'll be fine. Like, I got to let go on stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's like me, like.
We were talking earlier about it being the creative side and all of this stuff being a blessing and a curse. And what has made you great could also be in your way.
Yes. Oh, my God. Yes. It's absolutely held me back on things. 100%.
And that's something that I think doing this, I'm so grateful and fortunate to meet people and meet them at a certain time in their life where they're at a crossroads or they're at a new step, they're at a new challenge, and you're right there. You just, got the new studio and you're trying to take that next step, and to see that and what it's going to take, which from my opinion of just a person who enjoys your content, you're going to have to pull back from those things. And you know that. You said that with the clips already. You're like, I just can't. I can't.
Well, you know what though? I'll give myself this, because I'm always beating myself up, which I think can be very useful, but I do it way too much. I'm very proud of myself this year for all the things even 8 months ago I couldn't even imagine pulling off, like pulling myself back from, I mean. And that is it, but that's also a huge testament to the guys I've brought on now doing a great job.
Yeah.
Like it takes two to tango there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to do, and like, is it ever going to be done how I do it? No, nothing is ever done the way the creative, the person in their mind's eye does a creation. Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci couldn't do shit like each other, right? Doesn't matter. It's not a talent thing. It's like only you can see something like this way. It's never going to be done like that. But I remember my boss, Larry, told me something early on in my career. I was working on something that I was good at. I forget, maybe it was like something in the financial plans. And like I was doing a bunch of them. But he had wanted me really doing something else. I was doing a good job at this. But he said, these are great. But like, you got to think about where your time's best spent. You are really good at this, but you're also really good at this thing. And that has a way higher return for you. And I was like, huh. Nah. And then like a year later, I was like, huh. I think he might be onto something there.
Yeah.
Like he always gave me that wavelength, like, which to have that in a boss, to have that relationship like I had. I'm so fortunate to have that, because he gave, like, we butt heads and stuff because like we were so close, but like he always gave me the wavelength to like, he'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And also he was an only child, so maybe that has something to do with it. Yeah.
A little bit. Well, we talked a little bit about your the guys that are working with you now, and what you're doing, but I would love to get to the people that you've been able to speak to, and whether that's at the beginning or at the end, or who you're hoping to speak to in the next little bit. But no, so I want to talk about the people that you've been able to speak to. I mean, I'm not going to hide it. You've been able to have guests on that have ended up on Joe Rogan, the biggest podcast in the world. That's
kind of wild.
It is. It's so wild. And I guess let's get it out of the way. That the funny story of, I think, the Michio Kaku episode is just imagining you in your parents' house on a Saturday morning, waking up. You tell it.
Yeah, I mean,
and for those that don't know,
Michio Kaku's one of the most famous physicists in the world. You've seen him before. He's a real treasure. He's, at this point, he's been a scientist his whole life, but the last 20 years in particularly, he's been more of a popularizer of science, which means he goes around and he talks about science as the story and gets kids excited about math and science, which we need in this country so much, and he's amazing at it.
Phenomenal communicator.
Someone I just could listen to all day. Look, there's still some really complex things. No one's gonna be able to help you follow it, but like, he makes some complex shit so easy to digest, which is such a great example for so many out there who aren't as good at doing that when they communicate this stuff. But yeah, I mean, maybe the progression is kind of important to work our way into this. So
when was that?
That was episode 145. The only reason that I was able to get anywhere near that point was because on the way building, I figured out in early 2021 that obviously TikTok had long since taken over the world. This was actually a trend I was trying to convince people about early 2019, and no one was listening. And now, like, look at it, right? And I realized that all these amazing content creators around all these different niches were making incredible shit, like incredible stuff. And it's like, oh my God, how do you compete with that in the feed? But then I'd look at podcasters. First of all, many of them weren't making shorts. Mm-hmm. The ones that were making the shittiest shorts I've ever seen. They'd make like 1080 by 1350, not even 1920, right? Not even full screen. Throw a couple captions on it, call it a day. And some of them are getting views, and I'm like, wait, there's no bar. The bar is not low. There's no bar.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, why don't we make like movie trailers out of this? And I learned how to edit. Well, I had learned how to edit the podcast at that point, but I taught myself how to really edit and make things art. And I eventually figured out, wait, I can take fever dreams and do imagery and tell stories through imagery from pop culture, from movies and documentaries and stuff like that describe the stories these people are telling me in the studio. And I started to go very viral doing that. And so YouTube couldn't get anyone in late 2021, they couldn't get anyone to make shorts. And they were trying hard now, look at the world now, but like they were trying really hard to compete with TikTok, and none of these podcasts would make shorts.
So you started on TikTok.
I got a following on TikTok.
Okay.
And that was my bread and butter. I was doing a lot of views on TikTok. We had videos that did 18 million, 10 million, 9 million, 8 million. Yeah. Everything was hundreds of thousands. And once I figured out that cadence, it was like I was the only guy in podcasting actually making edits. So it still wasn't, some of these, you look at like Zach King's edits, like non-podcast, just this shit's unreal. Like you're nodding your head over there, Max. Yeah. Like this shit's unreal. I even know that guy, yeah. And it's like, oh my God, like, all right, we're not that good. But among podcasters, again, no bar. So we were making the best shit. And so then YouTube wanted people to make shorts so bad, but no one would do it. So the entire YouTube shorts feed was people reposting Joe Rogan clips, some Theo Vaughn, and I'd see some Logan Paul reposts, right? Reposts, not them making it. Mm-hmm. I think Theo may have made a few, but like it was mostly reposts. So I started making my clips over there, and they started going massively viral, like massively. So I owned the feed for like 3 months, and YouTube finally went to all their podcasts and said, look at this dumbass in New Jersey who no one gives a fuck about getting all the views. Start making shorts. So in late March, all the big YouTube names started making shorts. And so then it got more competitive, and I kept going with all the views, and that's what built my podcast, because I built a subscriber base. I did some shit that went very viral. Yeah.
Wasn't there a blow up that you?
Yeah. Well, they all blew up. I was averaging 4 million views a video on shorts.
And then those converted to long form listeners.
Eventually, not right away.
Took some time.
But what that did is it got like the first 86 episodes, outside of like Jim DiOrio and Louisa and some of these guys who actually did have backstories who I just happen to know. Everyone who came in was just like a friend. And the job was, we needed to set the precedent of doing a 3-hour in-person podcast, right? That's it. And, hopefully we get clips out of that when I looked after. I never to this day have recorded a podcast where in the podcast I'm thinking about clips. We'll worry about that after. If they're there, they're there. If they're not, they're not. We need to have the conversation, right? But I'm figuring, all right, we record for 3 hours with the boys. We're going to find shit in there. We'll figure it out. So I did that, and then by episode 87, I had been going viral on YouTube, and I got Raj Rajaratnam's guy to reach out and say, hey, he'd love to come in. Raj Rajaratnam was on every front page of every newspaper for like 2 years back in 09, 10, 11. He's one of the greatest investors of all time. And as I will say it, I'll let other people decide for themselves, he got framed by the Southern District of New York for insider trading. And that's a controversial opinion. Some people think he didn't, but they basically refused to prosecute any of the people who did the financial crisis because they were afraid to lose the cases because they didn't have precedent. So they decided to go prosecute hedge fund guys, some of whom are scumbags, to be clear, because they needed the headline to say prosecuting Wall Street. And he was not supposed to be the guy that they went after. They wanted, the show Billions?
Yeah.
You ever hear that?
I love that show.
The guy that's based on, Steve Cohen, who now owns the Mets.
Yeah.
That's who they wanted. Yeah. He's the greatest trader of all time. He's Bobby Axelrod, right? So they wanted initially to go to Raj and they figured Raj would roll over and rat on Steve with whatever they told him to say. And he didn't do that. So they had to turn his into the trial. And he went to trial. He thought he was going to win because he was innocent. He was an immigrant to the country. He said, this is how the American justice system works. No problem. You know, I'm going to pay for a good defense. It's not a lot of money for me because he's worth billions of dollars. And I'll get found innocent. And like, he didn't realize that like the United States Justice Department has like a 97% conviction rate when you go to trial. So, which is not a good thing, by the way. And so he got found guilty and we told his story on there. And that's the podcast I was way over prepared for. Today it would be way better. But he came to do it. Now, a lot of my friends would come from New York City and come down to do it. Probably like 50 of my guests to that point have been from New York. But having someone who's a name come in from out of town to my parents' house, that was a game changer. And then slowly, then David Satter came in for number 92. And then my friend Danny Jones asked me to speak with Andy Bustamante for 97. I made 7 clips. They did hundreds of millions of views on YouTube. He became the biggest CIA spy in the world. Then kind of the rest was history, and it worked that way, right? So these guests happen progressively in my network. And if I had to think about how they all ended up in my studio, thank God I never did, because it would have never happened. It was by the seat of my pants. There was no master plan. I think I only, to this day, now we're trying to do it more, like in the last couple of weeks, but until the last couple of weeks, I think I'd only cold reached out to 4 or 5 of my guests that I've had.
Oh, really?
Right? They're all like in network, like someone's connected. I'm like, ooh. They're like, you should talk to someone. So I'm like, I'd love to talk to that guy, right? Or it's something like that. And then like Michio Kaku, what had happened was there's a guy named Andy Greenberg who has now been on my podcast twice. Unbelievable writer at Wired.
I was gonna say, I know that name.
Yeah, he was the original guy on the Julian Assange story. Interviewed Julian Assange in person before he was Julian Assange, before the world knew him like that. He was even in that movie that they made about Julian Assange, like with Penn. Yeah. But so he had written a book called Sandworm in like 2019. I read it like the week before the pandemic. Now I don't get to read nearly as much, but I'm like a voracious reader. I love reading books. And he was fucking amazing as an author. So I was a fan. So throughout some episodes, as I was progressing the podcast, I would talk about Sandworm. Sandworm was about the capabilities of Russian hacking. Andy reports on Chinese hacking, Russian hacking, North Korean hacking, all of it. This one focused on Russia. And he told some harrowing stories about how in 2015, the Russian GRU team 77, I forget, but they're called Sandworm. That's their code name. They would hack into Ukraine's power grids and shut them down for fun, which is scary, right?
And who's this?
Russia hacking into Ukraine. Okay. And he reported on this is before the Ukraine-Russia war. He reported on all this. Now, being able to hack another country's power grid is probably if you do it at scale, it's scarier than a nuke. Because if you shut down all of America's power grids, that's worse than a nuke. Yeah. Some people would argue that, but like if they stay shut down for like 3 weeks, that's worse than a nuke. Yeah, okay? So I would talk about this on podcasts. And specifically, I talked about it in episode 51 with Nico, about a half hour in. I talked about it in episode 72 with Nick Castellucci, about 2.5 hours in. I talked about it on episode 79 with Mac Frederick, probably about 20 minutes in. And each time I was telling a similar story about the Sandworm team. So I make a clip from Nico's episode in August 2021 when I had first figured out the video overlay cadence. Mm-hmm. So I was really this was during a hot streak. And I make a clip and it goes nuclear on TikTok. And in that clip, I don't say Andy Greenberg's name. All I say is, and when I read that fucking book, it blew my mind. And so what do you think half the comments were? What's the book?
Oh, no way.
Now I answer my comments, so I'm answering Sandworm by Andy Greenberg. It's amazing. Sandworm, check it out. Link in but whatever. So Andy Greenberg's, he's a true reporter. So when he's out working on a story, he's traveling all over the world. When he's not working on like a book or something like that, this man likes to work remote at his apartment in Brooklyn, chill with a coffee, not go anywhere, do anything. So he's sitting in his apartment in Brooklyn, and his publisher calls him up like, dude, what the fuck did you do? The Sandworm came out like a year and a half before this clip, or like 2 years before this clip. He's like, what do you mean? And they're like, dude, your sales are going through the roof. What did you do? And he's like,
no way.
Nothing. And they're like, dude, something happened. Your book, Sandworm, is selling off the racks. He's like, what? Oh my God. I didn't do anything. I haven't done anything. And they're like, all right, well, that's awesome. Great. So that clip goes viral. He sells a bunch of books, doesn't know what it is. February, whatever it was, 22nd, 24th, whatever it was, that Thursday, 2022, war breaks out. I remember that day. And in my head, now remember, I made a 30-second clip from Nico's episode, 51, back in August. But at that point, I had now recorded episode 72 and 79 in the past 3 months, where I talked about it again. And I had an idea in my head, because this is when I was like on YouTube, everything worked. Yeah. Short-wise. And I'm like, what if I scripted it so that I cut together each of those cuts where you literally watch me change, right? Because I'm wearing something different every time. And it ties together like one story into a 45-second clip. And I'll even switch up the music so that it has like an effect. And it closes with me in episode 72 with Nick. I close the point by saying, you know how many people would die? Millions. And I'm like, that's what it's going to close on. So I go in my lab. I work for 2 straight days. I put together this clip. I started off with Mask Off by Future, which is what I started the clip back in August with. And I start with the same type of cut. I changed up some of the imagery because I was better at it now. But I start with the same cut where I say, have you seen this shit in Ukraine or whatever? And then once it drops from Nico's episode, 15 seconds in, it drops to an inner splice of 72 and 79 of me talking to Nick and Mac. And now it drops to Till I Collapse by Eminem, which is on a perfect 31-second loop to end on the Millions, where it drops on a right? And so I'm like, this is hot. Like this is like, when you have one coming together and the universe is putting the pieces together and just perfect timing, you're like, it wants this to happen. So I put this clip out, 10 million on TikTok, 25 million on YouTube. And I'm like, all right, I should hit up Andy Greenberg, because now I put his face in there too. When I said, and when I mentioned, and when I read that fucking book and it shows Andy Greenberg pop up. So all the comments are, what's the book? I'm like, Sandworm. And on YouTube, you can even put the link.
Nice.
So I'm like, Sandworm, here's the link. One of the best books I've ever read. So I'm like, all right, I should reach out to Andy. So I sent him a Twitter DM. 2 seconds later, he's like, yo, we finally figured it out. I was just about to text you, man.
Shut up.
And I'm like, yo, would you come in for a podcast? He's like, gee, yeah.
Yeah.
So he came down. He did one it's April now. When he gets there, he says, hey, I'm writing a new book. It's coming out in November. Not to impose, but it's on the dark web. I'm like, not like Ross Ulbricht. He goes, yeah. I'm like, son of a bitch. He's like, do you think I could come back and do it? I'm like, fuck yeah. So like he came back twice. So the second one did, the first one at the time did great.
So what does that feel like? That's the thing. What does that feel like? Like, do you
doesn't feel like anything. It feels like the next podcast, but like it's cool because like I'm a fan of this guy. So I'm like, we can help each other out. Let's go.
But that's
what it feels like.
To read somebody's book and then to be able to have them in the studio.
My grandpa gave me his book too.
That's awesome.
So I call my grandpa, who like doesn't know shit about fuck with the dark web and all that. And I'm like, yo, this guy Greenberg, I'm a fan. That was you. He's like, really? I'm like, he's coming in. He's like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, and like in his head, I'm like, damn, I wonder if he like thought I was a total failure. Cause he's like, wow, didn't expect that or something. But he, they always have my back. Like I knew that he always thought it was like going to work out. But anyway, so he comes in both times, and the second time, like the episode did really well, and he sold a lot of books opening week, not just because of me, because of other things too. And actually, he did say, and I'm not going to say it in case he didn't, so I'll stay off that. But he then puts me in touch with his PR guy. This is how it happens. Okay. I was part of half my job, like I explained earlier on Wall Street, was building relationships with people, always connecting the dots, not networking. That's what people said. Building relationships. Sometimes I even say the word networking sometimes, and I'm like, it's gross. I have relationships. I don't have a network. I have relationships, right? And so I get hooked up with his guy over at Penguin Random House, Michael, who's fucking awesome. And Michael was just coordinating with me. He's his PR guy at Random House. He's coordinating the whole rollout with me. Like, we actually were scheduling the second podcast, and he was going to send me a copy of the book ahead of time so I could check it out. Of course, I'm sitting there in the train parking lot trying to speed read as I'm picking up Andy from the train station because I didn't have time to read it. But great book. I did read it on the plane that weekend when I was flying to Tampa. It was a fucking amazing book. People should check that out. Tracers in the Dark. Great book, as always. But talking with Michael, and I built a relationship with him. And he gets good results from Andy going on here. So I was a fan of this guy, Joby Warwick, who's been a longtime reporter, a national security reporter at the Washington Post. Amazing, amazing journalist. In a time where people are questioning so many things about journalists, this guy is incredible. And one of his books won the Pulitzer Prize in 2016.
What's he cover? Like, what's he?
National security.
Okay.
So he covers all foreign geopolitics, my kind of shit.
Yeah.
I don't like domestic politics. I hate that shit. So I like looking at things in the world, right? Because you get rid of so many Republican and Democrat things. You just kind of talk about like the actual
what's really
conflicts. Yeah. So he had written a book in 2016 called Black Flags that won his second Pulitzer. He had won a Pulitzer in the 90s. He won another one. One was for reporting. Another one was for author, like on a nonfiction book. So he's one of like less than 50 people, I think, who's a multiple Pulitzer winner. And I think he's one of, I don't know the number, so I don't want to say it, but he's one of less than something that's, I think, even less of people who have won a Pulitzer from multiple different mediums, right? He won it for journalism, like in a newspaper, and he won it for a book. And his book, Black Flags, The Rise of ISIS, that won the Pulitzer, is considered the textbook on ISIS and the history of it.
Damn.
And his sources in this thing are nuts, man. Like, he's boys with the King of Jordan, right? And he doesn't always write positively about him. And that guy's actually really cool. King Abdullah, shout out King Abdullah. Like, I'm not a big kings guy. You know, we kind of like fought a war over that like 250 years ago. I don't know, like the kings and queens bullshit. He's one that's cool because he never wanted to be the king. And as his dad was about to croak, he was like, you're going to be king. And he's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And then he had to be king, and he's like a G. Like, he's a really cool guy, apparently. But like, Joby in his first book wrote, you know, he's a journalist, man. He's got to write what it is. Yeah. You know, you can make friends, but you have to, and a lot of journalists don't do this now, but you have to tell the story. So his first book, remember the movie Zero Dark 30?
I have
seen that.
I have seen that.
I feel like everything's a movie with this guy when I'm talking, and he's the one who hasn't seen him. You remember the Jordanian doctor who blew himself up on the CIA base and killed all those people? It was a real event in 2009.
Okay.
El-Bellawi. That plot line, Joby Warwick wrote that book. That was his first book. Huh. It was about that doctor in 2009. I forget the title of it, but it was about him. And he was a Jordanian, and that was a really bad look for Jordan. And Joby had to write the story, and it's not a good look for the King of Jordan, any of that. But the King of Jordan contacted him after that book came out. And this is a king. You would think these guys are like off with his head.
Yeah.
If like someone says something wrong, you're banned from the country. I mean, there's people who aren't kings who do that. And he called up Joby and he said, listen, I appreciate your honesty in how you reported in that book. You know, it's not a good look for the country. It's not a good look for me, but you were fair. It was stern, but it was fair. So look, man, if you're going to be writing books in the future, if you are working on a story and you need help getting to sources, I will help you.
No way.
And so the king became a major source on the second book. And once again, in the very first chapter, there's something bad. No, it was an honest mistake, but there's a big mistake the king made. I won't give it away. When he took office, when his father died, that caused a huge problem that Joby reported on. And he's reporting it, getting his thoughts on it too, saying, you want to tell me about this fuck up King Abdullah? And this is the same guy who'll show up to America and like hit up Joby and be like, yo, pull up fam. Like, which is wild. Crazy. But that's Joby's gift. Like he really disarms people. He's just such a great guy. I didn't know him at this time though. I knew that since Penguin is the biggest publisher in the world and it owns multiple companies, including Doubleday, where Andy Greenberg was, I knew Joby published under Doubleday. So shot in the dark, I'm like, God damn, this is such a big company. This is a useless endeavor, but I'll give it a shot. I hit up Michael. I'm like, Michael, I'm a huge fan of this one author. I don't know if you know someone over there who works for him. You know, I'd love to get in touch with him. He goes, who is it? I said, Joby Warwick. And he goes, that's my client.
No way.
And I go, there's like silence. And I'm like, so, and he's like, you want to talk to him? I'm like, yeah. I want to talk to him. He's like, all right, I'll make it happen. That afternoon has me on the phone with him and he's there. And so, because then he had like his book sales per view were crazy. Like we did really good views on this episode, but it wasn't a nuclear episode. It's one of my better ones, but it wasn't like, we didn't do like 1 million views, but like, he's like, I'm superstitious about checking book sales ever, but my wife went in and checked. He's like, I'll come up and do a podcast anytime.
No
Julian. Yeah,
that's
which
awesome.
was so cool.
To be able to like help people out like that.
Oh my God, that's the best part.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, yo, if I'm trying to add value for you, again, they're giving me their time. That motherfucker drove up from outside Washington, D.C. to be there that day in my parents' house. It was hilarious, right?
Yeah.
But after that, Michael gave my name to other people over there, and I got an email one night, because this all started with Michio Kaku, saying I'd been watching a Michio Kaku video while I was working earlier that day, and I get an email, long email. It's one thing about Penguin. Love you guys. You write really long emails. Let's shorten that shit up a little bit. Yeah. You don't need to tell me the book's great with some long quote. I believe you. Like I'll check it out. I'm sure it's great. I get this long ass email. It says like, Michio Kaku would love to come down to be on your podcast.
Shut up.
And it's like late at night. And I'm like, I'm literally like, all right, I'm sure you're getting a great joke out of this at my expense. Like, haha, cool.
You really thought they were kidding?
Yeah. I'm like, it wasn't Michael, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, that's great. I don't really have time for this. God bless America. No, we're serious. He wants to come on. My name's Julian. I work at Penguin Random House. I'm like, son of a bitch. So I'm on the phone the next day. I'm like, so like he's cool coming down to South Jersey. Oh yeah, can you do a Saturday? Yeah, I can do a Saturday. How's May or how's the end of April? I'm like, April 22nd is great. Yeah. Hang up. I'm like, holy shit! Like, what an idiot.
And when you say you're like, Michio Kaku's in the kitchen talking to my mom.
No. The funny thing is my mom basically for the last 4 years has taken care of all my grandparents. So she's been like living at their houses down the shore, and my dad can work remote wherever. So the funny part is they were never there.
No way.
Like it was like when a guest shit like Joby Warwick, they were there for that one. Yeah. Sometimes as later on, like in my latest episodes, some of my last ones there, they were there more often than usual.
Yeah.
Right. But for a long time, they were never, they're like, oh, who'd you have on?
It's
Who
just
showed up?
Funny thinking about
my
it.
dad's watching The Ring. Like, who the fuck showed up at my house? Wait, is that one a convicted felon? Like, I'd start bringing in these people who were in prison for like 20 years. He's like, God damn it. Like, lock the doors. Like, Matt Cox is showing up. My mom's like buttoning up. And he's like my boy. But he was the greatest fraud of all time, modern history. He's reformed, though. Great guy.
Yeah.
Like, he stays at my place, like, when he comes up here now. I love Matt.
You said he's like the Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah, read his Wikipedia. I swear to God, he's not like that anymore. But, you know, like, my mom's, like, horrified. You know, like that whole thing. But later on, they'd be there more. So Michio, they were not there. But I called my buddy Giovanni, who's like he owned his whole bookshelf is all Michio Kaku books. Fucking guy's written like 15 books. Like he's watched everything he's ever done. And I'm like, all right, are you sitting down? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, I have someone coming in and I want to let you know, if you want to be in the studio for this one, you can be in the studio for this
No
one. It's
way.
like, who is it? Like, am I gonna waste my time? I go, it's Michio Kaku. He's like, get the fuck out. And I'm like, yeah, man. And like, for me, I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like, he's an idiot. He's coming here. But for him, he was like, no way. I'm like, no, it's pretty cool. Like,
That's
I
awesome.
love Michio Kaku. So I was like, I was very, I joke about the idiot thing,
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
as I've said. But like, I was very honored that he was coming there. So this dude, like, I have a rule. No guest will ever pay to be on my podcast. And I will never pay for a guest to be on my podcast.
Yeah.
That takes it away. It needs to be real, right? However, when I'm flying in people from, California, I pay for their flight and shit.
Yeah.
Now, apparently a lot of podcasts don't do that. I'm going to keep doing that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's just the thing. Like, people are giving me their time. I'm going to cover their travel to get there. Not Michio. Michio hired a private driver. Like, we were going to be picking him up, and he's like, no, we got a driver, fam. We good. He hired a private driver on a Saturday, showed up there in a suit with a booklet, like a briefcase and like a giant binder ready to go. And I'm like, damn. So I had a lessee come in for that one too. And I say, you can't be in the studio because there's not enough room, but you'd be there to meet him. So he walks in. It's like surreal. I'm like, you want some coffee? He goes, no, I am good. And I could talk like he's such a sage.
Yeah. You do a great impression.
You feel like everything he says, you have to be like, yes, you got it.
Yeah.
Right. But he's like standing there in the kitchen and he goes, so you do a lot of downloads on YouTube? There's no downloads on YouTube. And Giovanni and Alessia are back there like this. And I'm like, well, they're views on YouTube, but I guess, we have some episode you'll do, I'm sure, very well. You're a very popular guy. Some do great, others do a little less, but we're really excited about this one. We're honored to have you here. He's go, oh, great. Yeah, it seems like you do a great job or something.
That's awesome. He seems like a real down-to-earth guy.
The nicest person ever.
So do you realize how smart you are?
I think he knows, but he doesn't.
He's so
he's humble.
Yeah. He doesn't make anybody feel like that. I've never seen him, because there's so many guys like that where they're sitting across from you and they want you to know. They want you to feel it too.
He does not.
And he's not.
Not at all.
I've never seen him even misstep.
Not at all. And gracious guy, all business. That man is ready to roll.
That's awesome.
He's like, okay, we go upstairs now. I'm like, yes, sir.
Ready to rock.
So we go upstairs and I'm getting the studio ready. He's pulled up in his chair, sitting there with his binder going through it. And there had been a funny event. Like, he had been on Joe Rogan. He was the first guy I had in there who had ever been on Joe Rogan. And my personal rule, there was one other guy who had been in there who was a friend who I knew, who had sat in the third seat on Joe Rogan once. He had never been a one-on-one guest at that point. That was James Fox, episode 139. My thought was always, all these other podcasters out there, it's like almost disrespectful. They just try to copy everything Joe Rogan does and do it and bring in a guy just because he brought him in. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go, I'm like, Joe Rogan is the best to ever do what I do. Yeah. He's so underappreciated, in my opinion, of what he does. He's incredible at it. He's the Michael Jordan of this shit. Between his MMA shit, the MMA show, and the main show, he's done, it's a little less than this, but call it 3,000 podcasts, okay? If you count for the times he had 2 guests in and then the times where he had people come in again, sometimes as many as 20 times. There's probably been, and this is on the upside, 2,400 people to come through his studio. There are 330 million people in this country. There are 8 billion people in the world. If I only feel like I can pick out of 2,400 people to bring in this studio, that's a me problem. And I just felt like so many podcasts sold out, just like, oh, Joe had in Jordan Peterson. I'll bring him in next week and get the views from that. Yeah. So my thought was, maybe one day we can get people here discovered and they'll get there. And that's happened with Lex Friedman. It's happened twice. Paul Rosalie and Andrew Bustamante discovered from what we were doing, and with an assist on both from my boy Danny Jones, who sent a lot of guests to Lex Friedman, by the way. Yeah. Still has never talked with Lex, but Lex gets a lot of Danny. is like the humblest guy ever. And that's the other thing. Andrew Bustamante is now the biggest CIA spy on the internet. Danny Jones is the guy who put him on.
He's had him like 5 times.
He had 3 episodes with that guy that all did well.
He had it when he had short hair.
Yes. Before anyone knew who he was,
Yeah.
and he gets no credit for it.
Yeah.
Andy's been on every podcast in the world except Joe Rogan, because Joe doesn't have on anyone except that one CIA guy, right? And that starts with Danny and with an assist from Matt Cox telling him to do it.
Yeah.
But shout out Matt. But you know, like that kind of stuff is so cool to me. And Danny's been doing it a lot longer than me, but now, you know, I've had a couple that like, I guess we teamed up on to get onto Lex. And Michio, actually, we didn't know this, but he left my studio and went to see Rogan. He had been on there before, but I wish like...
You had no heads up.
I wish, because then like, so there's a reason I'm explaining this, but yeah, we had that. James Fox had been on Rogan in the third seat years ago, but after we did an episode this year that really blew up, there were guests that went on Joe Rogan who had watched that podcast, who were talking about it to him, and then he texted James and brought him in, which was so cool.
Yeah.
I did an amazing podcast with him. He brought in Paul Rosalie in July,
Yeah.
which was about 9 months
Yeah,
after I
that's
brought him in.
phenomenal.
He's the best. And Paul, God, I'll go on a tangent on that if I start talking about that. But Paul Rosalie and Ryan Tate are my heroes, man. They're amazing friends, and they're doing unbelievable work thanklessly. And finally, Paul's getting the attention he deserves. When Ryan brought him to meet me, when Ryan, who runs VetPaul, an organization that fights poaching in Africa, that's incredible.
Yeah.
When Ryan brought Paul that weekend with him, when Ryan was coming on my show, and he just brought Paul into town, didn't tell me before he came, and we all met. I'm listening to them and I'm like, how are these guys not on every podcast in the world? And I looked
along for the ride.
I looked at him and I said, all right, Paul, you're going to come back in a couple months and we're going to do one-on-one. He's like, okay, great. I said, tomorrow we're going to do Ryan's as planned. But I'm like, within 1 year, you guys are going to be on Joe Rogan. One of you is going to be on there. And 350 days later, Paul was on Joe Rogan, which is so cool.
Yeah.
And like, I can't plan that, but like, I know it's not just, it doesn't ride with me. When I get someone incredible across from me, I just gotta do my best so that people see them.
And what was it about? Like, what was the it factor that you just knew?
Storytelling.
Yeah.
Paul's the greatest 30 to 60 second storyteller. He's a physical speaker. He's a fast speaker.
Does that.
He's well spoken. He looks the part. He looks like he's lived in the middle of the Amazon jungle for 18 years. Now he's a fucking Sicilian from Brooklyn who doesn't carry a gun out in the Amazon like an idiot. I don't know what went wrong in his childhood. But other than that, you know, he's a little crazy with a death wish, but he does amazing conservation work down there. And the guy, you can go through that podcast I did with him. Every fucking thing he says in there is a clip.
Yeah.
An idiot could make a clip out of that and it's doing 1 million views.
That's funny.
Right? Like, and it's just amazing. So, you know, he was able to get there and stuff. And so with how did we get on this again?
With Michio Kaku.
Yeah, but
he left to go to Rogan.
Well, he left to go to Rogan, but what were we saying before that? Oh, this is what it was. So we get up in the studio. He's like, oh, let's go upstairs and record. So I'm getting everything ready. Giovanni's like, he's a little starstruck. Because like,
I would be.
It's like, I've read every book this man's. And he's standing behind him. I'm in my chair, like getting ready, getting in the zone. But the shitty thing about being your producer as well is that, you know, you have so many details to get right before a podcast, but you have to talk with the guests to keep it social. Otherwise it's awkward. I put a little Big Booty mix on in the background so people get the vibe right. So yes, you know, Michio Kaku was listening to like some fucking Two Friends.
Yeah.
But at one point, I don't know why I did it, but there had been a podcast. Again, I don't know he's about to go on Rogan, but there was a podcast 3 months before with Eric Weinstein on Rogan, where this guy Eric Weinstein has been on there a bunch. I get a kick out. He's so smart. I enjoy him. I get a kick out.
Talk about a guy who could talk.
Oh my God. It feels like he's so smart. That man never saw a spot where people put one word that he couldn't put 10 that are like deep in the thesaurus.
Yeah.
And so like sometimes with Joe, I feel like Joe's like just baked sitting there and Eric starts having a conversation with himself.
Yeah, let him rip.
Like, cause Joe's just like, So he goes on this rant in February. And at some point he's just sitting there and he's talking about, I'm sick of this ivory wall around physics, Joe. And you can see him like getting like serious, like quivering. He's like, there's like a silence. He goes, Michio Kaku. Michio Kaku is out of control. Get Michio Kaku in here with me. And then suddenly Joe's like, wait, what? Why? Like he's
What'd
like,
that guy do?
he's like, he's such a nice guy. Like I can see Joe look at his head like, he was just here. He's such a nice guy. What do you, Michio, like the nice like Japanese guy who like says hi to everyone? What how can he be like this? You're making him sound like the devil. And he's like, Michio Kaku won't even consider anything that's not string. And he starts going off about string theory. So I'm sitting there setting up, and I don't know why I said it, but I turn to Michio and I say, so I'm just curious, I don't like to hit anything when we're on camera, hit people with something out of left field. What do you think about what Eric Weinstein said about you on Joe Rogan back in February? Because this went very viral. And he goes, who? and Gio's back there going, like, cut. Like, this is about to end. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And I'm like, Eric Weinstein, the mathematician, and I want to be clear, there was no like, who the fuck is it? There was none of that. Yeah, it was just like he was genuine, like who, and he goes, who is this person? and and Gio's like, oh my God, like falling in the corner. I'm like, so he's this mathematician, Peter too? He goes, oh, I know him. Yeah. And I'm like, he ran Teal Capital for many, many years.
That's right.
And he's like, oh, okay. Because he's like, oh, okay, like guy's legit, right? He like there was like a respect there. And I go, so you didn't hear what he said? And he goes, no. And I'm like, and now Gio's back there like, no, don't do it. So I got the big screen right there on the table. I go, all right, let me pull it up. And I know where the clip is already. So I go in there, I pull it up, and I put it up on the big screen, and I press play like 10 seconds before the line where he goes, Michio Kaku. And Michio, it was like, the guy's a machine. Like, he's 76, but he's
that
like,
old?
Dude, he's like,
he looks great. Good for him.
He's spry. That's how, like, he still figure skates apparently. Like, he's spry. So, like, you can picture him. He looks like tight in this big chair. I rolled in a special chair for him. He looks tight in this big chair. And then suddenly, like, I put it on screen. He goes, like, it was literally like a full, like, and he is glued, like, eye to eye, watching Eric Weinstein like that. And I'm just sitting here, and Gio's, like, back there like this. And then it gets to the part, like, where he goes, Michio Kaku. And I'm like turning, and he hasn't moved. He's like this. And I let it play. I'm like still setting up the podcast. I let it play, and like 80 seconds in, I'm like, okay, we get the point. And so I turn it off, and he goes, well, if you can't take heat, don't come in kitchen. and Gio's back. and in my head, I'm like, wow, hold that right there. Yeah. I need you to say that again in about 10 minutes. I'm not saying that to him. Yeah. But so we get on air, he talks for like 10 minutes, and then there's an opening where like clearly there's a spot where this is going to be relevant to bring up because he's talking about string theory. So I bring it up, and he must have said, if you can't take heat, don't come in kitchen about 5 times in 8 minutes. And it was incredible. And so what happened was that podcast might be the podcast I'm most proud of, because I don't remember any of it. I had the worst. Now, Max is sitting here doing a great job watching all the cameras around here and making sure everything's perfect. Yeah. I don't have that. I have Gio, who's probably still high, sitting in the chair right there, who doesn't know shit about fuck with production, who's just there along for the ride, listening to his fucking hero talk about space while he's spacing. So I'm running the production here. And so I had the worst camera problems I have ever had during a recording, by far. Damn. And I could see, because I have the screen right, because I got to watch this shit. I have the screen right there, and I can see that the lighting is going, you know, when you have like white balance out of control, like you fucked up the setting.
Max shaking his head, yeah.
The white balance, and I'm so in the moment, I didn't put 2 and 2 together. I was wondering why I was turning fiery yellow, and then because he had a white shirt and a white, like 15 minutes in, I paused for 1 second right before I went to ask the next question. I said, you had a white pad open in front of him. I said, can you close the pad? And he closed it, and the color went back. I said, okay, well, maybe we're good. 2 minutes later, guy's got white hair. So it starts firing up. So the entire time, people don't see this, but I would ask a question or make a comment to get him going. And the second the camera would switch to him, because I'd switch in the post edit, I'd be over here, leaning over, trying to fix the camera, checking it. At one point, like I went around to the side, and he's such a gamer. No matter where I was, this guy stayed right here.
And he knew what was
and
going
just, he didn't, I never said a
What a
word,
pro.
he was a fucking pro.
Oh.
And in my, I don't know what the fuck he's saying. He's saying big science shit. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what's happening here. But I guess I was listening for enough keywords that he's going through this whole thing. And I would hear him coming to the end, like his voice is like, and so that is why we call it quantum theory. And I know, gotta get in the chair right now.
Yeah.
So I'd be back in the chair. I would look like I was sitting there. I'm like, and I'm like, and Gio's no help because I can feel him looking at me like wide-eyed, like, what the fuck are you gonna say now, bitch? Like, and so I'd be there and I would start talking. I'd be like, yeah, it's an amazing thing. It's so fascinating that you could take that concept and somehow, and I'm like, what was he talking about? I'm buying time. How you could bring that back to what you just wrote your book about, which actually, you know what? Like, if you're going to get to quantum, which is what his book's about, that might mean that you might be able to figure out time dilation and time travel. Now, when I'm saying this, it does not sound this smooth. In my head, I'm like, I am fucking up the biggest podcast of my life.
Yeah.
But the whole time, Gio's like, wow. And I'm like, all right, well, that's a good sign. But at the end, 3 hours in, I'm like, I fucked up. Like, I just blew this whole thing. To be clear, that guy would have gone for 12 hours. I ended the podcast because I was exhausted. Because I had to go in between the cameras, back to thinking of deep science shit, make it digestible for the people out there, try to translate some of the things he's saying. And I was like, oh my God, fuck. So we finished the podcast. He goes, we're good? And I said, yeah. He goes, you think Driver is outside? And I'm like, Michio, I don't know. I didn't hire him. And he goes, we check if he's outside. So I go back to the window. He goes, he's outside. He goes, okay. He's out the door within 2 minutes.
What a legend.
Like, legend.
What a
Took
legend.
a picture right before he left. And so I shut the door and I like fall on the door and I'm like, Gio, how bad was that? And he's like, that was amazing. And I'm like, he's definitely hyping me up. So we had to make these Hollywood like level color corrections, which I'm not a Hollywood color corrector. So I brought in Danny Jones. It took like 8 days. Now, Max, you could appreciate this. We ended up having, across this 3 hour and change podcast, we had 88 separate color corrections to make that were extensive. There were really around 350 or 400 that we could have made. That's how many times the color changed to something new. But we rounded down and, got it as tight as possible. So I'm very proud of it. But shout out to Danny for helping me with that. And now I know how to do that, which is really cool. So that worked into my OCD afterwards, by the way, because now I color correct fucking everything. But now we got cameras that we don't have to do that. But anyway, so it took 8 days just to do that. We recorded on Saturday, April 22nd. The final color corrections were done like late Sunday night, early Monday morning, like into May 1st. His book was coming out May 2nd. So I'm like, okay, this is fine. We'll put out the podcast Saturday, May 6th. It's in book week. We're good. May 2nd hits, right? I'm working my way through the actual edit now. Drops an episode with Joe Rogan. And I'm like, fuck. Because it's like, who the fuck is going to listen to my podcast now? I just went on the biggest podcast in the world about his book the same week. So I was like, that was a bad moment for a minute. Because and also I tried not to be, oh, this guy just went on Joe. No, they came on me. So I was like, okay, it is what it is. So I whipped together, I went in and I listened to that episode immediately. And for some reason, Joe never brought up the Eric Weinstein thing. And I was like, holy shit. So I went into monk mode. It was the wildest 4-day edit I've ever done. The first day, the first 20 hours, I whipped together an 8.5 minute mini documentary of that segment where he's talking about that. and it made some waves online because it was Michio officially responding to this thing that happened 3 months
which
before.
nobody had ever asked him about.
So that drove people to the
He
episode.
didn't even know about it.
Right. And the episode did well. And now I think I actually just recorded with Brian Keating, great physicist out of California, who like Eric Weinstein, I think is like godfather to his kids. And so Brian, who I was a fan of, who now has since been on Rogan, but this was back in May when he hadn't been, he like hit me up when this happened because he knows both Michio and Eric. And he was like, let's do a debate on this, right? Let's settle this out. So I talked with him for 2 hours on Zoom. We hit it off. He's like, I'm going to be in New York in November. Let's do one. And then I ended up literally actually having the studio in New York by then. So we recorded one, which was cool. He got a chance to go on Joe Rogan then in August. So everyone knows him now, which is awesome for him. And just great guy. But, you know, that made some waves with him and through his channel. So then it drove to the episode and it all worked out. But that was kind of cool because it's like at one point there were very few moments in that podcast where I could be present. But I remember I thought I had the coloring under control again for a couple minutes, like maybe midway through the podcast. And I remember I had a moment where I could just sit there and I actually zoned out for a second where I wasn't listening to him. It wasn't long, but maybe it was like 15, 20 seconds where it just kind of hit me that I was like, I am a dude in his parents' house right now wearing a backwards hat, sitting across from the guy who continued Albert Einstein's work and was one of the inventors of modern string theory.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Like, what is that? That's the thing.
That's it. It was like, that's pretty, it felt great.
Yeah.
But it was like, that's pretty cool.
That's short.
And when the podcast ended and I finished the edits and I put it out,
yeah,
was very proud. Cause like when I edited, I was like, whoa, I don't know what the fuck got into me, but
yeah.
You ever seen you haven't seen Old School, right? The movie? Probably not. Max, you ever seen the movie Old School?
I've seen the clips. He's running down.
So like when they're doing the debates at the end and Will Ferrell's like freaking out on stage and having stage fright. And then suddenly he goes, and he like wakes up and he goes, well, according to the dissertation of the second law of thermodynamics, and it goes in his whole thing and people are like, and he like drops it and they're like, you win. And then he goes, they take him off the stage and he's like, what happened up there? I blacked out. That's what that was like.
Yeah.
Because it was the first time I edited and it was the opposite of cringing. I'm like, how the fuck? Because I knew the struggles that were, I mean, I can see my second camera that's not being shown, right? I can see me playing with, I'm like, and I remember all the struggles and I'm like, how the fuck did I? Like something was working through me that day. And I really appreciate it because it worked out and I'm really proud of it. But once it was out, on to the next, baby.
Yeah. That's the funny thing.
No thought.
Through doing this, I mean, again, I look at every single one of these like it's like the coolest thing in the world. Like I'm the complete opposite, like the way that I feel. So like, again, like Jim coming and making the drive to be here. I'm like,
I still do, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's still, you got to do your job, bro.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're on and you've done it. You get on to the next one. But when I was making episodes, even early. Yeah, of course you're thinking about the people who watch it this week, right? Because you're trying to get a result. But to this day, the thing I think about more than anything is the kid who finds my library 5 years from now.
Yeah, that's it. Like we talked
What's he going to think about episode 27? So yes, you're going to come up with better ways to do things that happened in episode 27 between how I hosted, what the product looked like, how it was presented, all that shit. I might cringe at now. But at the time, everything that I knew possible had to go into that episode so that I could use every resource I had at the time to make it look the best possible at this moment that I would put it out so that when a kid finds this later, maybe he'll be like, damn, there's some good detail on this.
Yeah.
Or like, damn, this was a great conversation.
I think that's what was cool about going back and looking at different episodes in different time periods was just seeing the growth. But like I said to you the other day on the phone, I was like, at the same time, the product from your perspective was the same. You were still asking the same type of questions. You haven't changed that much, whether it's Michio Kaku or your cousin. If you look at your style of interviewing, and that's...
Well, I've never interviewed anyone a day in my life. That's the trick.
That's the other thing.
I've never interviewed a person a day in my life. It's a conversation.
Yeah.
I don't go into it with an agenda. No, look, when I've So if I have Michio Kaku in there, do I know we're going to talk about physics and science? Do I
Yeah.
know we're going to talk about time travel and shit? Yeah, it's probably going to come up.
Yeah.
I don't have a plan of what it's going to be.
That's the funny thing. It's like
I don't. I'm like,
even doing this, like I'm over here, like honestly, like I feel like I'm naked. I don't have my note cards. I don't have my topics. I don't know where the things are going.
Good.
And it's like it's good. It's
look
great.
at how good you're doing.
It's gonna be growth. Am I? I don't know. Like
You're doing amazing.
idea.
What the fuck are you talking about?
That's the thing. But it's funny to think because like it's a control thing, and we've talked about that about other topics, like feeling like I'm in control because I know where things going, and I'm waiting. Like I'm thinking back to the first episode in I had. I was so nervous, and my boy Tommy came in, and I felt like he was a little nervous. So I was like, oh shit, I can't be nervous now. Like I got to make sure. He's okay. Thing. Yeah. And I was like, all right. So like we sat down and like that again will forever be like so special to me.
You know, when I first got out of college, there's a funny long story I'm not going to tell about right before I actually started my real career, but I was living up in North Jersey and I was going to have my first day on the job in finance it was going to be in January. So this was November. And one of my best friends is this kid, Chris Ibrahim. He's someone I became friends with later in college because all my best friends, except one, I became friends with.
Where's he from?
He's from North Jersey.
Did he play lacrosse?
Play football.
Okay.
But one of my, outside of like one of my guys, everyone who I became best friends with in college, I became best friends with the beginning of sophomore year. So Chris I became friends with towards the end of college because he transferred to Johns Hopkins to play football on their football team after freshman year. And I kind of like replaced him in like the crew as the 4th-string quarterback. Right. But so anyway, I had gotten to know him and he was from North Jersey. So when I moved up there, he and I were hanging out a lot more, and I had known his dad because his dad went to our college and would come back and visit, and everyone loved his dad. So I had a relationship with his dad actually, even like before him. And so his dad was very successful in the business that I was going into on Wall Street. I've been doing it for 30 years. And so he said, let me take you out to dinner. So we go out to dinner, and just Rob Ibrahim is like the best guy ever. And I'm just getting advice from this guy. I mean, he's just electric, right? And so at some point I say to him, Rob, well, I call him Mr. Ibrahim to this day, Mr. Ebes. But I'm like, Mr. Ebes, what if you were me sitting in this chair and someone else in your business were you, or you now, we're talking to you in this chair at 22, what's the number one piece of advice you would give me?
I love that question.
Yeah. And he said, funny enough, I was sitting in that chair and there was a guy sitting right here. And he gave me this advice. It was the best advice I ever got. I said to him, he said to the guy, how would you go get business from people and ask for people's trust to handle any of their finances as a 22-year-old? And the guy said to me, picture them taking a shit. And he's like, okay, well, that's a little much. And he goes, it's not a play. You don't have to think about the naked part or whatever. Just picture them on a toilet taking a shit, man or woman, because they take a shit the same way you do.
Yeah.
And he said that to me, and that kind of clicked with everything because I had already kind of done that, but that put me over the top. And you know, when you're speaking to someone like way older, there's on guard a little more. There's a little bit more of like a respect for them not maybe speaking the same language you do, right? But I always treated everyone like, you know, Jersey Jules, and like they sometimes horrified some people, but like they liked it, right? And so that was what I did. And when you're doing these podcasts, that person across from you takes a shit the same way you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ass down, face up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you can't let it get in your head, and you just be like, today, you're doing an amazing job. You're just being present. And like I told you, when I met you, like Jim introduced me to you on the phone unexpectedly one day. I'm like, all right, what the fuck is that? I don't know who the fuck you are. And it's, you know, sometimes Jay, he knows a lot of people. And sometimes it's like, all right, who is this person? Like, is this a Fed who's going to watch me? And I happen to be coming to Philly the next day.
That was epic.
And you're like, hey, I'd love to meet up with you. And I'm like, all right. You know, I always like to be like, okay, that's cool. You meet up with me at the station. I have to go speak at a rally down here for my man Tyree Wallace, Free Tyree. And you come to the rally. It ended up being 4 hours. I didn't expect that. You stayed there the whole time. I didn't have to sit with you. You were talking to people yourself. You're sitting there chatting up Michael Barkan for an hour. And I'm like, this guy can talk with anyone. Wow, I was really impressed with that. So don't treat it any different because these things go on and you have a mic in front of you. Get it out of your face. Get the headphones off and just talk like this, which is exactly what you're doing today.
And that's the funny thing is that like I've said to people, and I might have said it with the last episode with Jim, just getting to sit down with Mark Jackson. Like, dude, I watched him play basketball. I've seen him on TV for so long, and like that we've become like friends, and it's like wild. And it's one of those that it's funny. The example that you made or that you brought up, like I've thought about this through hearing people's stories. It's like everybody's struggling with something.
Yes.
Like I've had people come in here talk about addiction, talk about the deepest, darkest things that they've struggled with. And it's like the more conversations I have, and just like the story that you brought up about allergies, it's a completely different thing that we've not talked about. And Max is shaking his head over here. It's like, it's real shit. And like,
we were just talking on the break about it.
Yeah. And it's like, it's everybody's got something. And that is what has made me seem, or maybe realize that it's like, wow, we're all struggling in certain ways, but there's a beautiful, I think that there's a beautiful part of that because it brings that glow down. Without
struggle, and I hate to say it, but without sadness and tragedy in the world, not necessarily always directly to you. Yeah. You always hope the worst things don't happen to you. But without that, there is no happiness. There is no meaning to life. And it's a tough thing. Like you look at these wars going on around the world right now, it's ugly. War is hell. Yeah. It's horrible and makes me sick. And always the civilians on both sides of a war get caught in the middle. And while the men in suits shake their hands and call up their missiles and their guns and everything. And look, war is necessary sometimes too, which is the shittiest part about it. But those tragedies are things I wish I would never see happen. And I would never want to happen to anyone, let alone my own family or myself or the people around me. But something about the worst of the worst like that allows us to see when things are the best of the best.
The good, yeah.
And it's in everything, man.
Yeah.
The athlete Michael Jordan doesn't know what it's like to win 6 titles and no victory without losing for years, without his father, without losing the game he loved halfway through and having to leave the sport and getting in his mind because his father was murdered in the street. That's real life shit. Comes back and wins 3.
Yeah.
Like it's not just Michael Jordan won 6 titles. Everything was happy and go lucky. You know, Tom Brady won 7. Tom Brady failed 15 times.
Yeah. And that's it reminds me of the Kobe. And we talked about Kobe earlier. Like,
yeah.
When he tore his Achilles.
Yeah.
And I forget who was interviewing him, but when he wrote that long Facebook post about like,
yep,
I've done everything. I've done all of it. Like why? Like why this happened? And like what that brings out of somebody like that. Like it unfortunately, as we talked about when we were in the car, it was like sometimes you have to break. And that is something that from a larger society level, I hate to say it, but it is, you know, when you deal with things, when if it's a company, if it's a classroom, if it's something I've brought up, I think I brought up on the last episode, losing one of my dear friends in high school, Kelsey Kramer. It brought everybody together, and that was horrible to deal with. Absolutely horrible. And for her parents that still have to like, everybody obviously is still dealing with that, but like it brought us all together in a way that just made me look at these horrible life experiences as trying to find some level of good in it. Yeah. Because when I think about her looking down on all of us when we were all together and we were in those next 48 hours. I think that she was smiling down as we were, you know, having drinks in high school and laughing and trying.
Which is a beautiful thing.
Beautiful.
And in the middle of all that and all you've learned and the perspective you have from that and the perspective and learning that I'm sure all your friends have done and the good.
Yeah.
That as much as you would trade anything to have her here today, the good that has done in your life lets you know life. And yet in the middle of that, her parents are never going to have her back.
Exactly.
And you know what?
Yeah.
All due respect, they don't give a fuck about your good. Maybe if maybe with time passing, maybe they can at least
Yeah.
appreciate the silver linings of those things, but it does nothing. That
yeah.
tragedy that brings that good into the world has victims.
Yeah.
And you're a victim too of that, to be clear. But like,
Yeah.
you know, you ever think about how heavy that is?
Exactly. And that's something that I had two of my high school buddies in here for the 5th episode. And we told the story a little bit more and talked about it. And I heard from Mr. Kramer and he said, hey, that was really helpful to hear that. And
That's awesome.
That's the thing. That's the thing that, like, I think it's good for people who lose people to hear that.
Yes.
Even, I mean, Jim has talked about this on one of your episodes, like, to hear, because the memory lives on. Her spirit lives on within all of us all the time.
I want to tell that story, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
about what Jim did on my podcast.
Yeah.
It was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
And this is what I mean. I mentioned this quote somewhat earlier, but I want to give credit. He didn't say it exactly this way, as I later found out, but this is what he said. Rick Rubin, you ever seen him?
Yeah, I've got a book on my...
Oh my God. He's been, for years, he's been my hero. The guy is just a creative genius.
You read The Creative Act?
You know what? I bought it. I haven't read it yet, which I'm obsessed with. I have it.
It's amazing. I mean, I'm only like 40 pages in, but it is meditation.
I need to sit there for a week. That's a meditative book. Because I've checked out everything that guy's ever done for years. And he had a quote, again, he said it a different way, but I had mentioned it earlier, where he said, sometimes the pieces fall into place in such a way that it's almost as if the universe wants it to happen. And I experience that all the time, making content and doing things. And even when someone's sharing something on a podcast, I'm like, whoa, right? And, you know, you look at all these things that not only happened to you, but that happened to the person across from you when you're doing this. And when Jim was in there, I think it was the second time we ever did an episode. He had been my most popular guest early on. Like, he blew up. So we brought him back in, and he starts telling a story about this kid, CJ Morgan, who he didn't know. CJ Morgan was a senior at West Point, the military academy. He was a cadet there. He was going to serve in the high levels of the Army. He was a star wrestler. And you notice I say was, he's no longer with us. But Jim had gone to watch West Point wrestle, like at a huge meet, the year CJ died. And he didn't know CJ, but I won't go into that full story, but like, CJ left a huge impression on me. It's like, that kid is everything we want to see at West Point. Because like, the West Pointers, they care about that. Yeah. They care about all the guys, but they care about the ones who stand out. Like, that's a leader.
And he told me a bit of this story where he said CJ belted the national anthem.
Yeah, that was part of it. And so, senior year, tragic accident during a training exercise at West Point. Van flips over, CJ dies. I believe he was the only one killed. And devastating. So Jim meets his parents. They're from North Jersey. His father was a longtime Secret Service agent. Great guy. Mom was an amazing woman. Beautiful family, the whole bit. And they're devastated. They just lost their oldest boy. And so he tells the story on the podcast about CJ and talks about sitting with CJ's father a year later, unable to comprehend what it's like to lose your son. And I forget exactly what he said to him, but CJ's dad said to him, he goes, he's got, and I'm paraphrasing, he's gone now, but to honor him, we have to live. And while we live, one day we'll get to meet him again. And it was better said than that. But Jim, who is one of the best storytellers ever, and one of my favorite people in the world, like long time, very close friend, like someone I'd take a bullet for. You know, he told this so beautifully, and you could see he was borderline tearing up at the end. And he just paused, and on the podcast, he paused. He said, and one day we'll get to meet him again. And he's like, fuck. And normally one of my tricks to editing is there's no pauses. I make everything blend together in a way that you don't realize. I took out breaths. It's like an obsession I have with edits. I want it to sound like a song, like it was smooth and put together.
Yeah.
You can't tell with the music in the background, with the B-roll and everything. And so he doesn't know anything about this, but August 2021, I'm looking to make my next clip. I'm like, it's 4:00. I got 12 hours to get this next one done. Let's go. And I'm like, what about that spot? What about that spot where he talked about that? That hit. That was good. I want people to hear that kid's story. So I go in and it starts to come together quickly. And this is when I had less figured out on edits, so they didn't take quite as long. Starts to come together quickly. And then I start to find the music. I forget the name of the song, but everyone will know that piano song I used on that. It's a famous one. And I put it on the first drop of the opening clip. And he goes, he buried his son. And like the piano hits right on that. I was like, whoa, I had the chills. And then I put it through. And this was at a time where I was still primarily TikTok. And so on TikTok, at the time, every video needed to be between 27 and 29.5 seconds. When I went over 30, TikTok didn't send it anywhere. When I was below 27, it needed to be perfect or it wasn't going somewhere. So that taught me a lot about editing because I always had to learn how to edit to a specific point every time. So that I'm grateful for that like 10-month period because it made later edits a breeze because I had room, right? And so I get this thing to like, I think it was 27.5 seconds or something. And it drops right on the final beat. And there's the full pause in there with a zoom into him when he comes back and he like whips towards the camera and goes, fuck, and it just hit.
Yeah.
And it's one of those where you feel more pressure when you make an emotional clip, you feel more pressure because, and at that point, again, I'm going viral a lot. A lot of people may see this. And this is someone's memory. And you want to make sure you get that right. You get one shot at it. And again, like I said, you always would be able to do the edit way better today. But at the time, with everything you can do, all your, as Don Corleone would say, with all your powers and all your skills, you want to get it right. So I put it out the next day and it starts going nuclear right away. And because I used the TikTok text captions back at that time, it's reading. And it hears him say West Orange, New Jersey. So what do you think it does? It sends it to everyone within a 100-mile radius in New Jersey. So his entire town picks it up within 3 hours.
No way.
The clip ends up doing on that platform like 5-6 million right there. And his family saw it. But better yet, now I didn't know any of this. Okay? Didn't talk to Jim about it before I put it out. Nothing. The second anniversary of his death was coming up. And they have a golf outing. They had one on the first anniversary. It sold out. Everything was doing great. The second one was coming up 3-4 weeks. I think it was 4 weeks later. And unbeknownst to me, his mom was in visceral pain behind the scenes, devastated, because no one was getting back to them about the golf outing. And it wasn't filling out. And she said, oh my God, everyone's already forgotten about him. Now, Jim, of course, was always going, and you know he wasn't one of those people. And it's not, it's not a slight at people. People go about their life. Things happen, they put less emphasis on something, and she was devastated about it. And within a day of that clip going out, the golf tournament sold out. And like that for me, and at the time, I'm still making no money. Because even when I was going viral with these clips, I was making $0. Wasn't even in the creator fund. That's a whole long story. And my episodes weren't doing enough to make money. I had no brand deals. In the year 2021, I made $650. And this is still August 2021. I did like 100-some million views and made $660.
Damn.
Don't get into content, kids. Anyway, so at the time, I'm still feeling like a total loser and trying to make it. I still do. But Jim was like, that was such a heavy moment for me because Jim was like, this is why you're doing this, man. Yeah. He's like, you did that. And I'm like, no, you did that. You fucking did it. I just fucking put it together. He's like, no. I don't know shit about fuck with that. And this coming together and you taking the care on that and putting it out right and gift wrapping it. I had a still shot or a video of his dad talking to the news on the camera as Jim introduced his dad.
What?
And like, it was so, at the time, it was a perfect clip. And Jim made sure that I like would at least recognize that. And I was like, that's pretty cool.
That's special.
That's exactly
special.
what it is. It was like, I'm like, Jim, I could do this podcast for a long time and it doesn't get a hell of a lot better than that.
Yeah. And I want to figure out a way to try to get, I'm going to link that in here, but show people what it really looks like for one of your clips, because it's just different.
And that's an old one. That's not nearly what it would be today, but at the time,
but to put the clip
that was
of his
innovative.
dad, to put the clip of his dad in there,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like that's the creative.
The timing's 2 frames off, but that's okay.
That's the creative thinking. That's like,
I get to bring
different.
These people come in, you know, there's always moments that do it for you, right?
Yeah.
That happened in my studio on air.
Yeah.
2 moments stand out. Episode 57 with John Borick, Emmy-winning sports reporter.
That was one of the ones I did. What was the moment there? Because he told a wild story.
He talked about the value. I said, what did you love about doing what you do? And he said, telling stories. And in my head, I start thinking stories. And then I start looking at my clips, and I look at the ones that work and the ones that don't. I'm like, every time the clip is a story, it works. When it's not, it goes to shit. And that was July 2021. That's when I took off. That's when, like, I had been taken off every few clips, and I'd be like, why didn't this one work though? And then I moved to all stories. So that did something. And then when I had Danny Jones in episode 10, what was that? 10, I did Dill 101, Danny Jones 102. And Danny, who's been doing a podcast like this for a long time, said these podcasts are basically documentaries, bro. They're coming in for 3 hours and people telling the wildest stories. It's just filmed in a studio and it's them sitting around the campfire and telling it. And I was like, holy shit, I'm already doing that with my clips. And I'm like, that's what I'm doing. I'm bringing people's moments to life. And that took my clips to a whole new level, because then I realized I started to look at them, my edits, like, how would a documentary trailer do this? Or how would just a straight documentary do this?
Yeah.
And it took my skills to a whole different level. So like, I owe a lot of the innovation to what people have, unbeknownst to them, given me. Yeah.
And that's the other part. Like, what I love about this, like, I sit down and every single time, yes, there's like people listening. It's amazing. But like, I'm soaking this in. Yeah. I'm soaking all of this in, and everything that anybody's said on here, it's just like, I'm getting life advice the entire time. It's beautiful.
It's a hack, bro.
Yeah.
Right back at you. That's what I get. You know, I get to talk to people, and it has supplemented for some of my lost social life.
Yeah.
It's not a replacement. Like you said, you leave my place when you happen to be there. That never happens. Someone sit with me for a weekend, but you're there and you're like, holy shit, he's back there alone making thumbnails till 5 a.m.
I said to Jim, I think on the last one, I was like, it was Sunday. I don't even know if Julian realized the Eagles were on. Like, there was no, I mean, to your credit, and I'm just going to hype you up here because sometimes people I think need to hear it. And you worked the entire time. We recorded for 4.5 hours when I got there.
With Joseph,
yeah, which was amazing. Can't wait till that comes
human
out.
Being.
I think this will come out right before.
We're putting that out on the day before the 60th of JFK. That's why we were bringing him in for that one. So we're investigation.
This should go out right before then. So that'll people subscribe to your channel and then able to tune into that one. But right as you finished up the episode, 4.5 hours, you turn to Leslie and you're already thinking about something, and then Joseph leaves and. It's like, all right, let's grab a bite to eat. We go get something to eat. We come back and you were up till 4 a.m. editing, and I was just over your shoulder. And again, what you did for me there was taking something that probably took 4 hours, turning it into 8 hours to show me every single thing that you were doing.
There's a lot of value in that for me though, bro. I appreciate that. I appreciate being able to do that because it makes me be very conscious about what we're doing.
Interesting. I never thought.
Yeah,
because I was soaking in. I was taking notes, and Alessi was laughing when he was just like, like I'm gonna, if I'm gonna be here, I'm gonna get as much out of it as I can. But then I wake up the next morning on the air mattress, and you're already on the phone with somebody about another episode. And from that moment, the only time that you weren't working was when we were going for walks, speed walks. I was trying to catch up, and then when we would eat. And outside of that, you worked non-stop. And I called Jim when I got back. And honestly, it was insanely inspiring to me because I've been in a little bit of a rut in life in general. And I came back, I was like, that is what this is. That he's doing the work. And that's like where I want to get to be able to be
You
that
will?
busy. Yeah. Yeah. And now I think that I will. And it kind of got me out of a rut. And when I talked to Jim, I was like, dude, first, he's a madman like that. It's crazy, but that's art. And I said it to you when we were walking. I said, if you were baking muffins and you cared that much, I'd be fascinated. Like just to see anybody in their element doing that is nuts. And then when we were walking too, I was like, just watching a basketball player, all the little cuts that they're making, all the no wasted movement. It's just watching anybody in their elements is fascinating to me because I think humans have so much potential. And anybody listening to this, there's something that they love to do that they can do at that level. And to be able to do it professionally, like you're now able to do, it makes sense why you're that grateful to be able to do it.
Well, thank you, man. I'm glad you got so much out of that. And, you know, there's a lot of work that goes into this stuff. And but here's the thing. It's not unique. I might have said this earlier in the podcast, but we definitely said this on the car ride on the way there. It's like my boss said early in my career, nothing worth doing is easy. And everybody who ever started something worth doing, business, content creation, whatever it is, they work their ass off.
Yeah.
Even people who maybe later, unfortunately, became assholes and full of themselves, they probably worked their ass off at the beginning. And that part I can at least respect about them. But I hope it works out. I know it will. And it's cool to see that you got a lot out of that. I'm very grateful for that. And I appreciate the compliments immensely. I don't know if I deserve them, but I appreciate them. But that thing, at some point, that's got to end. It's no way to live, man.
Yeah.
And I mean, exactly what you said. And that's with me entertaining someone that weekend. That's my life.
Yeah.
That's what I do. I work.
And
then I work some more, and I work some more, and I work some more. And I love what I actually do. And there is actually pieces of that work that I love a lot. But when you're forced to do, I'm not talking about recording the podcast right now, I'm saying all the other shit.
Yeah.
When you're forced to do all that, all the time, never ending, it never stops. There is no Monday, there is no Sunday, there is no Friday, there is no Wednesday, there is no Tuesday, there is no Thursday, there is no Saturday. It doesn't exist. They're the same fucking day, and usually I don't even know what day it is. I'm a clusterfuck. And, you know, I'm sure there's people listening who are embarking on their own journey to start their own thing or have thought about it for a long time, and I never want to be the guy to say, don't do it, or no, do it, right? At least know what you're doing before you do it, though. Because I was telling you this earlier, but I'm human, you know? It doesn't happen that often now, but do I have late nights where I go through social media and I see everyone else living their life and watch time pass me by, watch ex-girlfriends get married, some have kids, watch friends get married, some have kids, watch family members, you know, going to the latest happy hour, having a great fucking time, watch people have accomplishments even at work, you know, people getting together for long weekends, going on trips. All this shit I used to do when I had no money, mind you. But all this shit, I always worked hard, but I used to play hard too, right? And I, you know, with very few exceptions, haven't done any of it in 4 years. And the longer I go doing it, the more I worry about if I'm going to forget who that person was. And I want to be the fun person I've always been. And it's scary out there.
I was going to say, are you scared?
It's very scary out there. Yeah, because I'm social and I can hold my own. That's not the issue. But like, the more time that goes by, the more pressure you feel around it and this thing. Because it's like, where are we? We're not there yet. When are we going to be there? And I don't want to bitch. I don't want to complain. But it definitely, I mean, I appreciate these compliments a lot. But I'm looking forward to the day where I don't have to get compliments like that, because it's a rat race, man.
I was gonna
It's
say.
just over and over and over and over again. And I keep my life as a podcast. I keep my sanity through a podcast. Eventually, I'm not going to like it if it stays that way.
Yeah.
It's not that way at all right now. I love it. But if we're at episode 270 and I'm still working 7 days a week, we're going to have a problem, bro.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll fully admit that. We're going to have a big problem.
So where's there? Where's
Where when I can turn it off for 3-4 days, not worry about a post, not worry about anything, and not worry about my income going down to zero and not being able to pay my bills.
Yeah.
My budget right now, and it needs to go up. It's too low. I'm leaving a lot of opportunities on the table right now. My budget is 18 grand a month. 7 months ago it was about 1,000, 1,500. Okay. That's business.
Yeah.
That's how it works. If you don't like the smoke, don't come in the fucking kitchen. But it's like,
And thanks for sharing that.
I am a human. And you ever read Animal Farm in school?
I got it right there. It's
Yeah,
just
remember
came in.
horse?
I haven't read it yet.
Work. I'm starting to feel like horse. And I don't want to be horse. You know, I want to have a family. I want to have a wife. I want to have kids.
Yeah.
I want to go on vacations. I want to work hard. You know, don't get me wrong. I don't want to be, I'm not one of these guys who's like, I want to retire and go to a beach. I'd die, right? Like, I always need to work. But I want to be able to throw away the phone at 6 o'clock if I want to, and don't fucking call me. If you do, I'll kill you. Right? Not really, but maybe. But you know, it's like, that's it. That's there.
Yeah.
You know, and right now, you know, it is cutthroat business, and I'm not cutthroat like that.
Yeah.
I am a celebrator of all people, and I'm in a business where most people think, oh my God, I can't talk about this guy who's going to take from my views. I don't operate that way at all. I don't dip to that level. I celebrate other people.
Yeah.
That's why I bring podcasters on my show. I reach out to them, right? I develop those relationships. My boy Danny Jones is not like that either, which I love. You know, Joe Rogan is the consummate champion of other people. And I wonder why so many of these people don't take his advice, including people who are friends with him, by the way.
Yeah.
Don't take the hint that maybe they should be like that too.
Yeah. Because it helps.
And once in a while, I'm human. I get a little bitter about that once in a while, because it's like, you never know. We're just saying, hey, because you know what people are copying you. You know what people are doing, what you're doing, which is fine. That's a great compliment. But then they won't ever say like, man, I really like what that guy Julian's doing.
Yeah. And it's funny.
Do you know what a difference that could make for me financially?
Yeah.
For me to be able to hire people so that I could have a life again? I get pissed off about it.
Yeah.
I do. I'm not saying that's healthy. I'm not saying that's good. That's my flaws as a human. But there's some people I go, fuck you, late at night. There's people I say it's secondhand about, for friends of mine who don't get the respect they deserve.
Yeah.
And look, it'll come around. We'll get our own.
Yeah.
But I really wish, especially in content, but in life too, there's other businesses that have this problem. People would, you don't have to sit there and suck each other's dick, but people could be decent to each other.
Yeah.
And not so goddamn like provincial.
Yeah. And it's funny, we talked about it on the one corner in Hoboken when I said, like, again, what you were doing for me, but I laughed because just the other night I checked out. I told you, I've been kind of studying Danny Jones. So I'm like, there's something really interesting there.
He's so good
with what he's doing. And it's, you guys are so,
he's so good.
You guys just vibe.
Oh, can you turn that off? I'm so sorry. Turn that off.
Yeah. But at the same time, like, you guys do similar topics and things in two completely different ways.
Yes.
It's beautiful to compare and contrast.
Danny Jones is the most underrated podcaster in the world.
He's so funny.
He's so fucking good.
Yeah.
And he thinks he's terrible,
which is
bro.
Hilarious.
He's the most humble guy I've ever met. And I can sit here and bitch about some people not shouting me out. That guy, bro, I finally heard, I heard Mark Gagnon shout him out a few weeks ago. Shout out, Mark. That was awesome. He shouted him out right at the top of an episode. He had in a guy that Danny had on. And I know I appreciate that a lot more for Danny than Danny. Danny don't give a fuck about any of this. He's just so happy, man. But like, Danny also is very successful. He built himself. He's self-made.
Yeah.
He didn't come from anything. He built his own career before he ever did a podcast, and he has amazing business. Like, he kills it, right? So he is bliss, right? And he's way better at making money than me. When you're me and you're still like working 7 days a week trying to make it, I think it's easier probably to get a little bitter once in a while when people seem to take and not spread the love, not the wealth. Spread the love.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's
because I do it for other people, despite
exactly.
when they don't do it for me, by the way.
Exactly. Because that's the funny thing is that I watched the episode. You were down there with Danny, but then Danny was up there with you. And you said to him, like, it's cool to see you kind of a little bit, to look up to him. And now you're doing that for me. And like,
I'm so glad about that, man.
And same. And shout out Jim DiOrio. And he would have been on the last episode that came out here with us. But an absolute gem of a human being. And to double down on what you said about relationships are the key to life.
Yes.
And when you said, you're like, yeah, Jim told me, and we were sitting right there, and he's like, yeah, I want you to mentor this kid. And you're just like, all right. And there was nothing. And then on the corner in Hoboken, you were like, yeah, when Jim said you were a good dude, I didn't have to do anything.
I never, like I just told you a few minutes ago, I never want to be the reason why someone doesn't do something or doesn't try. And I've seen the people who act holier than thou and like they don't have fucking time for you. And I never would. Now look, do I see every message I get? No, I have 87,000 unread emails. I'm sorry, guys. I don't have an assistant. I can't afford one yet, right? But when I see one, and I'd like to say I see a lot of them, I take those calls.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll get on with a fan. They're like, oh my God, you're on with me right now? I'm like, oh my God, you're on with me right now. This is awesome.
That's sick.
Like, I'm the dude in my parents' house. Like,
yeah.
But it's sad to me that they're that impressed by that.
It's funny because
that's not a reflection on me. That's a reflection on everybody else.
But it's also the world we live in because it's so humanizing. Like I said, I got to meet you, and it's funny. I was gonna start the episode with this, but you didn't see this, and I'm sure it's because it's part of the messages. On September 3rd, I reached out to you on Reddit.
Oh, that was you.
And I said, hey, Julian, just stumbled upon your podcast when my brother works at Lightspeed, passed along your recent app with their CEO, Dax. I'm already halfway down the rabbit hole and loving your curious questions. Knowing you're also in Philly, I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee and introduce myself.
So I'm thinking someone else.
Started my own podcast a few months ago and would love to learn more about your experience. Sincere thanks, Christopher.
Did you message me on Reddit?
Yeah, but it's like to the trendify. There's no way you saw it.
So I don't even know where the message tab is on Reddit. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's confusing because there's like message.
I know where the DM
chat.
tab is on Instagram.
It's bizarre.
But I answer all comments on Reddit. I know where that is.
But my point is that that's
awesome.
At that point, I reached out to you thinking like, oh my God, he's this.
No,
you're a human. You're a dude. You're a guy. You're no different than anybody else. And I like laughing about it, but like waking up on the air mattress a month later in your apartment and your new studio.
I'm a guy. These shoes I bought in February 2017. These jeans are from 2016. This shirt I think actually was someone else's. This shirt was from senior week in college that someone else left there. And the socks I got off Amazon, I think like last year.
Yeah.
I'm about 2 steps above broke, and I've been working 7 days a week for 4 years. So yeah, I'm a real human.
Yeah. And it's no different. But that's the thing is when you see when somebody's a part of your life, like we've talked about podcasts being a part of people's routines and lives and different things that they do, you think that these people are different and they're not. And you just, everything that you've just shared is like, you're not different. You're not there.
I'm as flawed as everyone else, bro.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just have a podcast.
And Jim told the same kind of stories, and it was just, and that's my whole thing. So like, first and foremost, thank you for coming.
Oh, dude, of course. Thank you for having me.
This is great, man. But I want to ask you what we can do for you. But before you even answer, I want everybody to go subscribe because I sent my boy Liam, who's actually a Mulca Hill guy, and I said, I was like, yo, do you know Julian Dorey? I don't know if you've heard his name or he had no idea. And he looked up, this was last night, and he's like, I'm down the rabbit hole. His clips are insane. This is like my exact content. I'm going to be listening all weekend. And it's that
Did you tell him I was in Mulca Hill for a while?
Well, yeah, that's what I said. I was like, I just didn't know.
He recorded with Michio Kaku in Mulca Hill.
Yeah. And he had no idea. And I was like, and that's the thing, is just getting people to find, Yeah, and that's the hard
Thank you
part
for
of things.
doing that. It's word. I always tell people word of mouth is the greatest thing we can get.
Because once you find it, dude, it's incredible.
Thank you.
You do good work. You work hard.
Thank you.
You're doing the right thing. And you're helping people out.
I hope so.
And at the end of the day, no matter what, that's why when you're struggling and bugging out a little bit, I'm like, yeah, I'm looking at it again, outside eyes, like you're gonna be fine.
Well, you've been a great shrink to me in the short time we know each other, so you're helping me just as much.
Well, shout out to all the people that have helped me. And
Yeah, man. But dude, you're doing a great job with this.
Thank you.
I'm biased, but I hope you do your episodes like this moving forward. You don't need cue cards,
You
bro.
think?
You can do. Oh, you think?
I
Listen to this shit back. How did this sound, Max? Pretty fucking good, right? This guy knows every question to ask. He knows how to keep the conversation rolling. I do this for a living. You're good,
dude. Well, thank you.
Do it like this.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been fun. It's been a lot more. I have been a lot less in my head.
Good.
It's allowed me to be a little bit more present. And we'll be recording tomorrow morning with my guy Blaze. But what can we do outside of subscribing? Because
you already did it, man. You had me on. You asked people to subscribe. Julian Dorey on YouTube, Julian Dorey. That's it, man. I appreciate everything from everyone. I'm on Instagram, Julian Dorey Podcast. We're trying to build that page. I have to focus on the other platforms more now. I've been doing that. And then on TikTok, we have a few pages, Real Julian Dorey Podcast Clips. I don't fucking know. But
there we go.
YouTube's where we care.
We'll link them.
All right.
But we'll get it done. But thank you so much for coming. And,
dude, of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And thanks, Max.
Shout out, Max.